Our live-in maid, she posted. She didn't know the maid was her landlord. I was carefully arranging the heavy antique silver forks on the dining room table when the blinding glare of a smartphone ring light was shoved directly into my face. My daughter-in-law was broadcasting live to 50,000 followers, giggling as she angled the camera toward me, wiping down the mahogany table. "Look at this," Chloe announced to her audience. "Our live-in maid is actually good for something after all." I glanced toward the imported leather sofa, where my 42-year-old son Terrence was staring at his phone. He watched his wife's live video, looked directly at my face, and typed a crying, laughing emoji into the chat. They genuinely believed I was a helpless, broke 68-year-old widow depending on their charity. They had no idea how much of their lifestyle still depended on me, or that within days I would control the very roof under which they were humiliating me. I gave them neither a scene nor a tear. I placed the polishing cloth on the table, walked quietly to my room, opened my laptop, and severed their financial lifelines. By the next morning, Chloe was calling from a luxury clinic screaming because her platinum card had been declined. That was only the first charge that stopped working. The life they had built on my patience was about to stop working too. The dining room of their supposed luxury home was suffocatingly warm that evening. I had spent the previous 2 hours polishing the intricate silver flatware that had belonged to my own mother, a strong black woman who taught me the value of hard work and silent observation. Chloe, my son, Terrence's 34-year-old wife, was throwing one of her pretentious dinner parties for her high society friends. I had moved into their home 3 months prior, under the strict guise of needing family support, playing the part of the tired, downsizing grandmother who could no longer manage on her own. In reality, I was there to conduct a deeply personal audit, and what I observed in that house was a masterclass in sheer disrespect and financial delusion. Chloe marched into the formal dining room wearing a silk slip dress and a pair of designer heels she had charged to a discretionary account she assumed escaped my attention. She held her phone high in the air, constantly narrating her fabricated life to an audience of strangers. When she saw me carefully aligning the crystal wine glasses, she did not say thank you. She did not offer a hand to the woman who gave life to her husband. Instead, she pushed that glaring light right into my eyes. Her voice took on that fake, syrupy tone she reserved entirely for social media. She reduced me to a household servant for the amusement of strangers and announced that I was finally earning my keep. My hands, which had spent 3.5 decades analyzing complex corporate audits and tracing offshore accounts, went perfectly still. I looked past the blinding light of her camera and locked eyes with Terrence, my own flesh and blood. The boy I had carried, raised, and educated through endless sacrifices. He was lounging comfortably, entirely unbothered, scrolling through his social media feed. He saw her degrading video. He saw the humiliation painted on my face, and his chosen response was to tap a laughing emoji and hit send for all her followers to see. Any ordinary mother might have broken down crying right there on the Persian rug. An ordinary mother might have shouted, demanded basic respect, or wept at the sheer, unadulterated cruelty of her own child participating in her public degradation. But I was not an ordinary mother. I am a 68-year-old woman who spent 35 years working as a senior fraud investigator for one of the largest financial institutions in Chicago. I spent my entire career sitting across wide mahogany tables from arrogant, greedy men in expensive suits, watching the color drain from their faces as I systematically unraveled their lies and froze their assets. I do not do temper tantrums. I do ruin. I placed the silver dessert spoon down on the table with a soft, deliberate clink. Silence was the only defense I gave them. I smoothed the front of my tailored cardigan, turned my back on Chloe and her glowing camera, and walked quietly down the hall to the guest room they had so graciously allowed me to occupy. Behind me, I could hear Chloe scoffing loudly, telling her virtual audience that good help was just so sensitive these days. I let them laugh. The comedy show they thought they were starring in was about to be canceled permanently. Once inside the quiet sanctuary of my room, I locked the heavy wooden door and pulled my encrypted laptop from beneath my folded sweaters. I sat at the small writing desk and opened my secure private banking portal. The screen illuminated my face with the cold, hard, indisputable numbers of reality. Terrence and Chloe firmly believed I was living off a meager fixed widow's pension. They believed my move to their house was born of absolute financial desperation and failing health. What they did not know, what they could not even fathom, was that my liquid assets alone eclipsed the net worth of every single person they had invited to their little dinner party combined. I navigated seamlessly to the family umbrella accounts. 2 years ago, when Terrence had come to me crying about his consulting business failing and the bank threatening to take everything, I had quietly linked a platinum credit line and a discretionary checking account to his name to help him stay afloat. I had given my son a vital lifeline to save his dignity. He and his wife had promptly turned that lifeline into a luxury slush fund to impress people who did not actually care about them. I clicked on the recent transaction history tab. The sheer audacity of their spending habits was laid bare on my glowing screen. $400 at a high-end downtown steakhouse, $800 at a designer boutique, and thousands more scheduled to be withdrawn for Chloe's personal cosmetic expenses. When you hunt financial parasites for a living, you learn one fundamental rule of engagement. You never, ever warn the target before you cut off their money supply. If you shout and threaten, they have time to prepare hide funds and manipulate the narrative. If you act silently, they suffocate before they even realize the air has been cut off. I moved my cursor to the master control settings. With 3 precise, unemotional clicks, I completely froze the platinum card Chloe carried in her $1,000 purse. That was only the first cut. I went into the secondary checking account Terrence used to pay his ridiculous country club dues and restricted all outbound transfers. I severed them completely legally and instantly. The profound satisfaction that washed over me was cold and pure. I closed the laptop, the soft snap of the screen shutting, sounding exactly like a heavy bank vault locking into place. I packed a small overnight bag with my essentials, grabbed my car keys, and slipped out the back patio door while they were still busy pouring expensive champagne for their arriving guests. I drove to a quiet, elegant boutique hotel a few miles across town, checked in under my maiden name, and slept more peacefully than I had in a very long time. The next morning, the sun was shining brightly over the city, casting long shadows across the pavement. I sat at a corner table in a quiet, upscale cafe, a safe distance from the inevitable chaos I knew was currently brewing in my son's house. Soft jazz played through the overhead speakers, mingling with the sound of espresso machines. I ordered a black coffee and a warm butter croissant, opening the morning paper with absolute tranquility. At exactly 9:45, my cell phone began to vibrate against the wooden table. The caller identification flashed with Chloe's name. I took a sip of water and let it ring. It stopped, then immediately started vibrating again, desperate and frantic. Then came the text messages popping up in rapid succession on my lock screen. She asked where I was. She complained that the house was a mess and the caterers left a disaster. Then a minute later, a much more frantic text arrived. She demanded to know why her card had just been declined. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee. The bitterness was absolutely perfect. My phone began to ring for the 4th consecutive time. This time, I pressed the green accept button and brought the receiver to my ear. I answered in silence and waited for her to speak. Grandma B. Chloe's voice was shrill, echoing with absolute panic. Her usual condescending, snarky tone was completely gone, replaced entirely by the frantic pitch of a woman whose entire carefully curated social standing was collapsing in real time. She was speaking so fast, she was nearly hyperventilating. She told me she was at the wellness clinic right now. She said she had just had her premium Botox and filler done, and the front desk staff was telling her the platinum card was frozen solid. She demanded that I call the bank right this second and authorize the charge. She complained that the bill was $2,000, and the receptionists were looking at her like she was some kind of street criminal. I could hear the hushed, judgmental whispers of the clinic staff in the background of her desperate call. Chloe was physically trapped in the marble lobby of a luxury medical spa with fresh fillers in her face and absolutely no way to pay the massive bill. She was fully expecting me to be confused, to apologize profusely for the bank error, to scramble to fix the situation for her so she would not be embarrassed. Instead, I kept my voice perfectly level, the kind of icy, unbothered level that drops the temperature in a room by 10 degrees. I spoke softly into the receiver, making sure she heard every single syllable. "Chloe," I said, "you told your 50,000 followers last night that I was your live-in maid." There was a sudden, breathless, heavy silence on her end of the line. The devastating realization was hitting her slow and incredibly painful. Maids do not pay for their employers' facial injections. Chloe, I continued my words, sharp measured and exact. You are a wealthy, successful social media influencer. I highly suggest you figure out how to pay your own bills. She began to stammer, her voice cracking with actual fear. She told me to wait. She told me I could not do this to her. She cried that Terrence had promised her the account was fine. I moved my finger and pressed the red end call button, cutting off her pathetic panic mid-sentence. I set the phone face down on the table, picked up my coffee cup, and took a deep breath. The feeling of finally taking back my power from these leeches was intoxicating. But I knew the moment of peace would be incredibly brief. Through the large plate glass window of the cafe, I saw a familiar dark gray luxury sedan pull aggressively into the parking lot. The tires screeched harshly against the pavement as the car angled into a space entirely too fast, nearly hitting a concrete barrier. The driver's door flew open. It was Terrence. His face was flushed red, his jaw tight, his expensive suit jacket flapping open in the wind as he marched with heavy, angry steps toward the cafe entrance. He had tracked my phone's location. My son was not coming to apologize for his deplorable behavior the night before. He was coming to demand his money back, armed with the arrogant, misguided belief that he could simply intimidate his elderly mother into submission. He was about to find out that the woman sitting peacefully in this cafe was not the frail, forgetful old lady he thought he had been exploiting. He was about to step into the ring with a veteran auditor who had financed far more of his life than he understood, and he had absolutely no idea the trap he was walking into. The bell above the cafe door chimed a sharp, frantic note as it was violently pushed open. The morning sunlight poured in, outlining the broad, tense shoulders of my son. Terrence stood in the entryway, his chest heaving under his tailored Italian wool suit. He scanned the quiet room with wild, erratic movements, ignoring the startled looks from the barista and the two college students studying at the corner table. When his eyes finally locked onto me, sitting perfectly still with my coffee, his face twisted into a mask of aggressive, manufactured concern. He marched across the hardwood floor, his heavy footsteps echoing over the soft jazz playing from the speakers. He did not bother pulling out the chair opposite me. He slammed his palms flat onto my table, rattling my porcelain saucer. "Mom, what is wrong with you?" he demanded. His voice was loud enough to draw stares, but perfectly pitched to sound like a desperate, exhausted son dealing with an unruly patient. "You just cut off the accounts. Chloe is stuck at the clinic having a full panic attack. Turn the cards back on right now." I took a slow, methodical sip of my coffee, savoring the bitter roast. My gaze stayed fixed on him. "Terrence, you are causing a public disturbance. Sit down and lower your voice, or I will have the manager ask you to leave." He blinked, clearly thrown off balance by my absolute lack of emotional reaction. He pulled the chair out and dropped into it, leaning across the table to invade my personal space. The scent of his expensive cologne purchased with my money was suffocating. "Mom, listen to me," he whispered, switching tactics. His voice dropped to a patronizing, gentle tone that made my stomach turn. "Your memory is slipping again. We talked about this last week, remember? You explicitly promised to cover our household and medical expenses this month because my consulting firm is waiting on a big client payout. You told Chloe to go treat herself. You're acting crazy right now. I watched him perform. I watched the slight twitch in his left eye, the sheen of nervous sweat accumulating on his forehead, the way his hands gripped the edge of the table. He was trying to gaslight me. He was attempting to rewrite reality banking on the arrogant assumption that my age made my brain pliable. He truly believed he could convince me that my own financial boundaries were just symptoms of cognitive decline. I placed my coffee cup down, folded my hands neatly on the table, and leaned in closer. I let the silence stretch between us until his forced, empathetic smile began to tremble. "Terrence," I said softly, my voice devoid of any maternal warmth. "I spent 3 decades putting Wall Street embezzlers, corporate thieves, and fraudulent hedge fund managers in federal prison. I have interrogated men with 10 times your intellect and 100 times your net worth. I know exactly what a desperate, lying man looks like when he realizes his funding has dried up." He opened his mouth to interrupt, but I raised a single commanding finger, freezing him in place. "Do not ever try to play mind games with the woman who taught you how to count." I continued enunciating every single word with cold precision. "I do not have a memory problem. I remember exactly what I promised. My help covered basic utilities when you came to me crying about foreclosure. It never included your wife's cosmetic injections, your lavish dinner parties, or financing a household that publicly reduces me to a servant for entertainment. His face flushed a deep mottled red. The patronizing mask slipped completely, revealing the defensive cornered predator underneath. "You are taking a harmless joke completely out of context," he hissed, glancing around the cafe nervously. Chloe was just being funny for her followers. "It is social media, Mom. It is not real life. You are making a massive deal out of absolutely nothing because your mind is playing tricks on you. You are getting paranoid. It is fascinating how quickly a manipulative person will accuse you of paranoia the moment you notice their disrespect," I observed smoothly. "The accounts remain frozen. You and your wife will have to figure out how to survive on your own income, assuming you actually have one." Terrence slammed his fist onto the table again. This time there was no fake concern. There was only raw, unadulterated venom. "You leave me no choice, Mom," he sneered, his voice dripping with a dark, threatening edge. "If you keep acting this erratic, if you keep having these paranoid delusions and punishing your own family, I am going to have to make some hard decisions." I tilted my head, studying him like a fascinating piece of forensic evidence. "What kind of decisions, Terrence?" He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest, attempting to project an authority he simply did not possess. "Decisions about your living situation. Decisions about your health. We just want you safe, Mom. But clearly you cannot manage your own affairs anymore. You are becoming a danger to yourself and your finances. Maybe we need to look into a facility. Assisted living. A place where professionals can monitor your episodes and make sure you do not do anything destructive." The air between us went ice cold. The threat hung over the small cafe table, heavy and suffocating. He was not just throwing a tantrum over a frozen credit card. He was laying the groundwork for a systematic takeover. He was explicitly telling me that if I did not continue to act as his personal bank, he would use my age against me to strip away my freedom. He intended to lock me away in a state-run facility and seize total control of my entire estate. The sheer audacity of his greed was no longer just pathetic. It was dangerous. I was sitting across from a man who was willing to destroy his own mother's life to maintain his illusion of wealth. I looked at him, feeling the last remaining thread of maternal indulgence snap and dissolve into dust. "Is that a threat, Terrence?" I asked quietly. "It is a reality check, Mom," he replied, standing up abruptly. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. "We are done playing these games. You have until tonight to unfreeze those accounts and apologize to Chloe. If you do not, I will be making some phone calls tomorrow morning, for your own good." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a crisp $20 bill, and tossed it onto the table next to my coffee cup. "Buy yourself something to eat. Try to remember the way home." He turned on his heel and marched out of the cafe, the bell chiming wildly behind him. I sat in the quiet aftermath of his departure, staring at the crumpled $20 bill. Fear never arrived. What settled over me instead was a deep strategic clarity. Terrence had just shown me his entire playbook. He was going to use the legal system to declare me incompetent. I picked up the $20 bill, slipped it into my purse, and walked out to my car. It was time to gather my files. I drove back to their sprawling, ostentatious house, parking my car discreetly at the edge of the driveway. As I walked up the pathway, I could hear Chloe's shrill, unhinged voice echoing all the way from the second-floor windows. She was screaming into her phone, likely yelling at some unfortunate customer service representative at the credit card company, demanding to speak to a manager. I bypassed the heavy oak front doors entirely. I used my key code to open the side entrance that led directly into the attached 3-car garage. I needed to access the fireproof lockbox I had hidden behind a stack of seasonal decorations near the back wall. I needed my original property deeds, my birth certificate, and my physical bank tokens. The garage was cool and dimly lit, smelling strongly of expensive leather cleaner and motor oil from Terrence's luxury vehicles. I walked quietly toward the back corner, my rubber-soled shoes making no sound on the concrete floor. As I reached past a tower of cardboard boxes, I saw a shadow move. I froze, my instincts instantly on high alert. "Grandma," a voice whispered from the darkness. I stepped around the boxes and found my 16-year-old grandson, Malik. He was sitting on the cold concrete floor, his knees pulled up to his chest, a pair of heavy noise-canceling headphones resting around his neck. Malik was Terrence's son from his first marriage, a quiet, brilliant, deeply observant boy who had been entirely marginalized when Chloe entered the picture. Chloe treated him like a burdensome roommate, and Terrence was too obsessed with his new wife to notice his own son fading into the background. "Malik," I said softly, crouching down to his eye level. "What are you doing out here in the dark?" "Hiding," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Chloe is throwing glass bottles against the wall upstairs. She is breaking things because her card stopped working. She said it is your fault." I placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I am sorry you had to hear that, sweetheart. You are safe down here. I am just gathering some of my things." Malik looked up at me, his dark eyes wide and serious. He did not look like a frightened child. He looked like a young man who had been carrying a very heavy secret. He reached into his backpack, which was resting on the floor beside him, and pulled out his digital tablet. The screen cast a pale blue glow across his face in the dim garage. "Grandma," he whispered, his hands trembling slightly as he held the device out to me. "You have to look at this. They are not just joking about the nursing home. They are actually going to do it." I took the tablet from his hands. The screen displayed a high-resolution scan of a legal document. "Look at what Dad asked me to print from his home office network this morning." Malik continued, his voice tight with anxiety. He thought I was just doing my homework, but I saw what he sent to the wireless printer. I adjusted my reading glasses and focused on the document. The bold black letters at the top of the page seemed to burn themselves into my retinas. "Petition for appointment of emergency conservator." Below that, in the section labeled Proposed Conservatee, was my full legal name. The document was filled with fabricated, devastating claims. It stated that I was suffering from severe, undiagnosed cognitive decline. It claimed I was exhibiting erratic, aggressive behavior, mismanaging substantial financial assets, and posing an immediate danger to my own physical well-being. It formally requested that Terrence be granted absolute legal authority over my medical decisions, my living arrangements, and total control over all my bank accounts and properties. My blood ran cold. This was not an empty threat thrown around in a coffee shop. This was a drafted, formatted legal petition ready to be filed with the county courthouse. Terrence had already paid an attorney to draw up the paperwork to strip away my human rights. "They are going to try to lock you away, Grandma," Malik whispered, wiping a stray tear from his cheek. "I heard Chloe laughing about it on the phone with her friend last night. She said once you are declared incompetent, they can move you to a state ward and take over your entire pension. You cannot stay here. You have to run." I stared at the glowing screen, reading the sickening lies my own son had constructed to steal my life. He was perfectly willing to trap me in a sterile room, medicated and forgotten, just to maintain his access to my wealth. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, that it bypassed sorrow entirely and hardened into pure, calculated fury. I handed the tablet back to my grandson. I looked into his frightened, loyal eyes. He had risked his own safety in this toxic household to warn me. I was the only person in this family who possessed an ounce of integrity. "I am not running anywhere, Malik," I said, my voice steady, completely devoid of fear. I stood up, smoothing the front of my jacket, feeling the familiar razor-sharp focus of an investigator preparing a federal indictment. "When someone digs a trap for you," I told him, placing a reassuring hand on the side of his face, "you do not run away. You step aside and you watch them fall into it themselves. Now, wipe your eyes and come inside. We have a lot of work to do." I ran my index finger down the smooth glass of the tablet, absorbing every fabricated legal clause of the conservatorship petition. Malik did not give me time to process the betrayal. He immediately swiped his thin hand across the display, minimizing the document and launching a black terminal window. Rows of green code cascaded down the screen at a dizzying speed. I watched my 16-year-old grandson effortlessly bypass his father's encrypted router logs with the precision of a seasoned cybersecurity contractor. He bypassed the two-factor authentication protocols on Terrence's cloud storage drive using a backdoor script he had written entirely from scratch. The terminal window vanished, replaced by a synchronized folder of recovered message threads. Malik tapped a specific conversation thread between Terrence and Chloe. The messages had been permanently deleted from their personal smartphones, but my grandson had successfully pulled the raw data packets directly from the network shadow backup server. I leaned over his narrow shoulder, reading the rapid-fire exchanges, illuminated in stark white text bubbles. Chloe had sent a message at 2:14 in the morning 3 days ago. The text detailed a step-by-step plan to hide my necessary blood pressure medication in order to induce extreme physical lethargy. Terrence had responded with a simple thumbs-up icon, followed immediately by a lengthy paragraph outlining his precise legal timeline to drain my primary checking account the exact moment a judge signed the proposed medical order. Another message from Chloe casually suggested they start turning up the digital thermostat in my guest room to 85 degrees while I slept. She hypothesized that the resulting severe dehydration would make me appear genuinely delirious and confused during my morning routine. They were not merely plotting a simple financial takeover. They were actively and maliciously orchestrating a systematic decline of my physical health to successfully manufacture the exact physiological symptoms required for a clinical dementia diagnosis. I read a subsequent text message where Terrence explicitly instructed his wife to begin secretly recording my reactions to sudden, incredibly loud noises. He outlined a specific strategy, telling her to deliberately provoke me into a heated argument so he could later present the edited video footage to a county magistrate as definitive proof of my supposed aggressive instability. The sheer clinical detachment in their digital planning was breathtaking. They discussed the immediate liquidation of my antique jewelry collection in the exact same thread where they calculated the minimum dosage of over-the-counter sleep aids they could secretly mix into my evening chamomile tea. Malik's fingers danced across the virtual keyboard, pulling up a secondary folder of internet search histories. He showed me how Chloe had spent the last 2 weeks obsessively researching the absolute worst, lowest-rated state-run nursing facilities in the county. She specifically sought out institutions known for extreme understaffing and heavy chemical sedation protocols. She had already bookmarked an application page for a grim cinderblock facility located 3 hours away, ensuring I would be entirely cut off from any potential visitors or legal advocates. I reached out and rested my hand firmly on Malik's wrist, stopping him from scrolling any further down the sickening transcript of my planned demise. I had seen more than enough of their medical sabotage. I needed to see the underlying financial motive driving this desperate acceleration. I nodded silently to Malik, signaling him to pivot his digital excavation toward their banking records. Malik closed the communication logs and opened a secure folder labeled with the name of Terrence's supposedly thriving consulting firm. He extracted a massive multi-page digital file and expanded it on the screen. It was a finalized commercial loan application submitted to a prominent national bank just 4 days ago. I adjusted my posture, my professional auditing instincts immediately taking over as I scanned the fine print. The principal loan amount requested was exactly $400,000. I moved my eyes to the guarantor section of the dense contract. My full legal name, my date of birth, and my highly protected Social Security number were listed as the primary financial backing for the entire commercial debt. Terrence had completely bypassed standard corporate underwriting by pledging my secure, unblemished credit history as direct collateral. I zoomed in on the final signature page. A nearly flawless reproduction of my signature sat on the primary authorization line. I studied the curve of the capital letters and the specific slant of the cursive text. Terrence had clearly spent hours practicing the exact pressure and flow of my handwriting, likely tracing it from old birthday cards or discarded bank statements he had stolen from my private room. He had executed the forgery with enough skill to easily pass a standard automated bank verification check. I scrolled through the attached asset declaration forms he had submitted alongside the fraudulent application. He had boldly listed my private, hard-earned corporate pension fund as the primary source of liquid capital to secure the massive loan. My mind rapidly calculated the catastrophic financial implications of this single forged document. Terrence's consulting business was completely insolvent, generating absolutely zero legitimate revenue for the past 3 quarters. He had no genuine intention and absolutely no means of making the exorbitant monthly payments required by this commercial loan agreement. The very second he inevitably defaulted on the debt, the National Bank would immediately execute their legal right to seize the listed collateral. They would freeze my pension accounts, drain my lifelong savings, and legally confiscate every single dollar I had earned over my 35-year career to satisfy the $400,000 deficit. Terrence was fully preparing to sacrifice my entire financial existence to temporarily plug the massive sinking hole of his own vanity and failure. If this loan successfully cleared the final underwriting process, I would be rendered entirely destitute in a matter of weeks. The sheer scale of the financial exposure was staggering. He had not just stolen my identity to secure a moderate line of credit. He had fundamentally weaponized my entire net worth to save himself. I reviewed the digital timestamp stamped on the bottom corner of the electronic submission receipt. The bank was currently holding the application in the final stage of executive review. The funds were scheduled to be fully dispersed into Terrence's private business checking account within the next 72 hours. The ticking clock of my total financial ruin was officially counting down. Malik looked up at me, his face pale in the dim light of the garage. He understood exactly what the numbers on the screen meant. He knew his father was about to annihilate my life. I handed the tablet back to my grandson with absolute terrifying calm. Grief over my son's lost morality would have to wait. My focus shifted to neutralizing the immediate threat. I instructed Malik to download a complete encrypted copy of the entire loan application packet directly onto a secure, untraceable external flash drive. I watched his fingers move rapidly, executing the data transfer with flawless precision, ensuring no digital footprint was left behind on Terrence's local network router. We now possessed the undeniable hard evidence of federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. I stood up from the cold concrete floor of the garage and deliberately brushed the faint layer of dust from the knees of my trousers. I pulled my secondary unregistered mobile phone from the deep interior pocket of my tailored blazer. This was a secure device Terrence and Chloe did not know existed, purchased specifically for highly private and unmonitored communications. I dialed a strictly restricted number entirely from memory. The encrypted line rang exactly twice before a deep, remarkably resonant voice answered. It was Vance, my personal private wealth attorney, a man whose legal ruthlessness was perfectly matched only by his absolute discretion and loyalty. There was no room for pleasantries. I launched immediately into a rapid, highly detailed briefing of the active, ongoing fraud. I recited the specific commercial loan application number, the exact routing details Terrence had provided the underwriting bank, and the precise legal statutes my son had flagrantly violated by forging my signature. I explicitly instructed Vance to contact the senior fraud division of the target bank immediately. I ordered him to intercept the disbursement of the $400,000, but under no circumstances was he to alert Terrence or the local authorities of the financial interception. I wanted the fraudulent loan quietly flagged, securely isolated, and held in a state of perpetual bureaucratic suspension, completely starving Terrence of his expected cash injection. I then carefully explained the meticulously drafted emergency conservatorship to Vance, dictating the exact legal avenues we needed to preemptively block in order to ensure their impending medical trap failed upon arrival at the courthouse. Vance absorbed the staggering scope of the familial betrayal without a single gasp of surprise or shock. He simply confirmed my rapid directives, the sharp sound of his pen scratching rapidly against thick paper echoing on the other end of the secure line. He asked if I wanted to formally involve the district attorney and pursue immediate criminal indictments for the blatant identity theft. I firmly and immediately declined the suggestion. Calling the local police right now would only result in a messy, protracted public trial where Terrence could play the pathetic role of a misunderstood, desperate businessman struggling to survive. A standard quiet prosecution behind closed doors would leave too much room for Terrence to reshape the story. I wanted an inescapable public reckoning that stripped away the fraudulent high society image he and Chloe had built. I instructed Vance to urgently begin drawing up the preliminary paperwork for a highly specialized blind trust explicitly outlining my stringent requirements for the aggressive acquisition of distressed local real estate debt. I firmly hung up the phone and slipped the device back into my blazer pocket. I turned to Malik, thanking him quietly and sincerely for his immense courage, and instructed him to completely erase his terminal history before returning silently to his bedroom. I confidently stepped out of the garage and walked back through the heavy side door, entering the plush, brightly lit main hallway of the house. The very instant my shoe touched the expensive woven carpet, the grand double doors leading to the formal living room swung violently open. Chloe burst out into the hallway, her face contorted into a deeply unsettling, highly exaggerated expression of fake sugary sweetness. She clasped her freshly manicured hands tightly together just beneath her chin, practically bouncing on her expensive designer heels with a sickening display of manufactured delight. "Grandma B," She chirped, her voice absolutely dripping with sickening artificial enthusiasm. "I am so incredibly glad you are finally up and moving around the house. We have such an incredibly wonderful surprise planned exclusively for you. We are having a very special guest over for a lovely dinner tomorrow evening. It is a brilliant doctor friend of ours from the country club. He is just going to stop by for a delicious meal and a very quick, extremely friendly little medical checkup to make absolutely sure you are feeling perfectly healthy." I stared directly into her deceitful, widely smiling eyes. The sheer transparency of her malicious agenda was almost insulting to my intelligence. She genuinely thought I was blind to the invisible noose they were attempting to slip around my neck. I offered her a slow, perfectly vacant, and entirely harmless smile in return. "That sounds simply lovely, dear," I replied, keeping my tone beautifully docile and convincingly fragile. "I cannot wait to meet your highly esteemed medical professional." I walked past her, actively preparing my absolute masterpiece of deception. The following evening, just before 7, Chloe transformed the dining room into a stage. The table was set with the same antique silver she had mocked me for polishing, and every place setting seemed designed to announce wealth rather than hospitality. Terrence wore a charcoal jacket and moved around the room with the nervous energy of a man preparing to close a crooked deal. Chloe kept checking the angle of her phone against a crystal vase. She thought she was being subtle, but I could see the tiny red recording indicator reflected in the dark glass of the china cabinet. Malik had already warned me that they intended to turn an ordinary dinner into evidence. They needed me confused, unstable, and dependent, so I gave them exactly the performance they had ordered. I changed into a soft cardigan, left my reading glasses slightly crooked on my nose, and walked into the room with careful, shortened steps. When the doorbell rang, Terrence rushed to answer it before anyone else could move. The man who entered introduced himself as Dr. Raymond Cole. He was in his late 50s, polished in the way men sometimes become polished after years of selling confidence rather than earning trust. His navy blazer was too fitted, his watch too conspicuous, and his smile arrived a fraction of a second before his eyes. He did not show me identification. He did not ask whether I consented to a medical evaluation. He shook Terrence's hand like an old business partner kissed Chloe on the cheek, then looked at me with the bright, artificial sympathy people use when they have already decided an older person cannot understand them. Terrence said, "Mom, this is the doctor we told you about. He is just here as a friend, nothing formal." I widened my eyes and looked from Terrence to the stranger. Then I deliberately called my son by his late father's name. "Harold," I said softly, "why did you bring a doctor to dinner?" Terrence's face changed for only an instant, but Chloe's phone tilted upward. She had captured it. Dr. Cole stepped toward me and rested 2 fingers on my wrist without asking permission, as if the gesture itself established authority. He told me not to worry, and said people my age often became anxious when routines changed. I thanked him and asked whether he was the veterinarian who used to treat our neighbor's poodle. Chloe pressed her lips together to hide a smile. Terrence looked almost relieved. Every mistake I made was becoming another brick in the cage they hoped to build around me. At dinner, Doctor, Cole chose the chair directly across from mine. Chloe placed her phone against the base of a floral arrangement lens exposed between 2 white roses. Terrence poured wine for everyone except me and explained with exaggerated gentleness that alcohol might interfere with my medication. I had never told him I was taking anything that prohibited wine. The statement was not concern. It was narration for the recording. I let my hand hover uncertainly over the cutlery, picked up the dessert fork instead of the salad fork, and watched the 3 of them exchange quick glances. Cole began with harmless questions. "What day is it, Beatrice? Do you know where we are? Who is the president?" I answered one correctly, hesitated on another, and deliberately confused the month with the previous one. Then he shifted from conversation to interrogation. He asked whether I had recently made unusual financial decisions. He asked whether I had become suspicious of family members. He asked whether I sometimes believed people were stealing from me. The questions were not designed to discover my condition. They were designed to manufacture a diagnosis around facts they already knew. I could almost see the future affidavit taking shape in his mind. Elderly widow exhibits paranoia, financial impulsivity, confusion about dates, and hostility toward caregivers. I looked down at my soup and allowed my shoulders to sag. I told him I had been forgetting things lately. Chloe's smile deepened. Terrence reached across the table and patted my hand for the camera. He said, "See, Mom, this is why we are trying to help. You keep thinking everyone is against you." I let my gaze wander toward the window, as if I had lost the thread of the conversation. Inside, I was cataloging every word. Experience had taught me that crooked people reveal the most when they believe the witness in front of them is too weak to understand what is happening. Dr. Cole continued. He asked me to remember 3 words and repeat them 5 minutes later. Apple, river, chair. I nodded solemnly. While he moved on to another question, my phone vibrated once against my thigh beneath the table. Malik was upstairs where he had promised to stay out of sight. He had seen Cole's car arrive and had taken down the license plate from his bedroom window. The text on my screen contained only 4 words, "Working on him now." I turned the phone face down in my lap and returned my attention to the performance. Cole asked me to draw a clock face on a paper napkin and set the hands to 10 past 11. I drew the circle badly on purpose, placed the 12 slightly off-center, then paused with the pen hovering. Chloe shifted her phone closer. Terrence exhaled through his nose, barely containing his satisfaction. I finally drew the hands correctly, but immediately pretended not to understand what I had done. Cole nodded with professional-looking gravity and wrote something in a small leather notebook. Then he asked me the 3 words again. I said Apple Road and table. Chloe's eyes flashed. She believed the evening was going perfectly. That was when I decided to give them something memorable. I lifted the heavy bowl of tomato bisque with both hands, as though I meant to move it closer to me. My wrist trembled theatrically. I allowed the rim to catch the edge of my plate and the bowl tipped forward. A wave of hot red soup poured directly across Dr. Cole's polished brown loafers. He shot backward with a curse, knocking his chair against the wall. For the first time that evening, his smooth medical composure vanished. He stared down at his shoes, furious. I covered my mouth with both hands and apologized over and over, asking whether I had ruined his beautiful shoes. Chloe's recording phone shook because she was laughing silently. Terrence told Cole not to worry and promised to replace them. $800, Cole snapped before he could stop himself. These are $800 shoes. The room went quiet for half a beat. A doctor making a friendly house call had just revealed exactly how much attention he paid to the price of his wardrobe. I lowered my eyes and murmured another apology. Inwardly, I smiled. While Chloe fetched towels and Terrence helped Cole blot the soup from his loafers, my phone vibrated again. This time, Malik's message was longer. He had found the man's full name through a public professional registry and a news archive. Raymond Cole had once held a medical license, but it had been suspended after an insurance fraud investigation. He was prohibited from practicing independently. Malik also found a civil judgment showing that Cole owed a substantial personal debt to a consulting company connected to Terrence. The relationship was suddenly obvious. Terrence had not invited an impartial physician. He had invited a financially compromised former doctor who had every reason to produce the opinion Terrence wanted. I read the message twice, memorized the details, then deleted the notification from my lock screen. Cole returned to his chair with damp cuffs and a face that no longer bothered pretending to like me. His questions became sharper. Had I ever wandered away from home? Numb. Had I left a stove burning? Numb. Had I forgotten to pay taxes? Numb. When I answered too quickly, Chloe interrupted and told him that I was embarrassed and often covered for myself. Terrence added that I had become combative about money. Cole wrote down their statements as though they were clinical facts. I realized then that the evening was never about evaluating me. It was about creating a paper trail. The conclusion had been purchased before the first question was asked. I decided to test how far they were willing to go. I looked at Cole and asked with sudden clarity what hospital he was affiliated with. His pen stopped. Terrence answered for him, saying the doctor consulted privately now. I asked for the name of his practice. Chloe laughed too loudly and said I was getting worked up. Cole leaned forward and told me agitation was common in patients experiencing cognitive decline. I held his gaze for 3 full seconds, long enough for him to wonder whether the confused woman had disappeared. Then I let my expression soften again and asked whether dessert was coming. The relief around the table was almost comical. Chloe brought out coffee and a lemon tart. Terrence began talking about how difficult it had been to manage my finances. He claimed I had nearly transferred a large sum of money to a stranger. That was an outright invention. Cole nodded gravely and said financial recklessness could justify immediate protective intervention when paired with memory problems. There it was, the phrase they wanted: protective intervention. Terrence asked what such an intervention might involve. Cole explained that a temporary power of attorney could allow a trusted family member to prevent harmful transactions, while a court considered a broader conservatorship. Chloe asked whether it could be done quickly. Cole said that if the person signed voluntarily, there would be much less resistance. No one looked at me while they discussed the mechanism for taking control of my life. They spoke around me as though I were already absent. When dinner finally ended, Cole stood near the kitchen island and lowered his voice to Terrence, but not enough. He said he would prepare a written statement describing signs of disorientation and impaired judgment. He warned Terrence that formal testimony would cost extra. Terrence replied that they would settle everything once the accounts were under control. I was carrying coffee cups to the sink, my back turned, and I heard every word. Chloe escorted Cole toward the foyer. Halfway there, he stopped, patted his blazer, and made a show of realizing he had brought the wrong folder inside. He returned to the kitchen, placed a thick cream-colored packet on the counter, and said he would pick it up the next day. The act was so clumsy it would have embarrassed an amateur. The folder was positioned less than 3 feet from where I stood. On the top page in large legal type were the words, "Durable Power of Attorney." My name appeared beneath them. Terrence told me not to touch it because it was private paperwork. That warning was intended to make sure I noticed it. The front door closed behind Cole. Chloe and Terrence disappeared into the living room, speaking in excited whispers. I remained in the kitchen, rinsing cups as though nothing had changed. A few minutes later, Malik slipped in through the service hallway. I dried my hands and showed him the folder without lifting it from the counter. He quietly confirmed the name on the first page and told me he had saved screenshots of the public records concerning Cole's suspended license and fraud case. I told him to send copies to Vance but not to confront his father or access anything beyond information already available to him. Malik nodded. He was brilliant, but he was still 16, and I would not let my son's crimes turn my grandson into another casualty. I then called Vance from the privacy of my room. He listened as I described the examination, the secret recording, Cole's promise statement, and the planted power of attorney. Vance's voice hardened. He told me the document, if signed and properly completed, could create real complications, even if we later challenged it. He also said Cole's disciplinary history would make any medical opinion vulnerable, but we should not rely on that alone. We needed Terrence and Chloe to reveal their coercion unmistakably. I looked through the bedroom door toward the silent hallway and understood exactly what they would try next. They had tested confusion tonight. Tomorrow, they would need fear. I asked Vance to stay ready and to preserve every record Malik had lawfully found. Then I took a silver fountain pen from the locked compartment of my suitcase and set it beside my bed. Terrence believed the folder on the kitchen counter was a weapon waiting for my signature. He did not know I had already decided exactly how I would let him use it. The heavy oak grandfather clock in the foyer chimed 2 o'clock the following afternoon, its rhythmic ticking, the only sound cutting through the thick, oppressive silence of the house. I was standing near the base of the grand sweeping staircase, meticulously dusting the glass of a large decorative mirror with a microfiber cloth. My posture was purposefully slightly stooped, maintaining the physical illusion of the frail, declining woman they so desperately needed me to be. Through the reflection in the glass, I watched Chloe emerge from the master suite on the 2nd floor. She was wearing a pair of expensive silk lounge pants and carrying her phone, but she was not recording. She paused at the top of the landing, her eyes darting across the architectural layout of the foyer, actively checking the sight lines. I recognized that specific calculating gaze immediately. It was the exact same look a seasoned insurance fraudster gives a busy intersection before deliberately stepping out in front of a slow-moving commercial truck. She was mapping her crime scene. Chloe descended the carpeted stairs with measured, deliberate steps, stopping exactly on the 3rd step from the bottom. The marble floor of the entryway gleamed menacingly just a few feet below her. She looked directly at me. The absolute malice in her eyes stripped away any remaining facade of familial civility. She did not say a single word. Instead, she raised her right arm, pressed the sharp edge of her freshly filed acrylic fingernails directly into her own left forearm, and dragged them downward with brutal, unflinching force. The deep, jagged scratches instantly welled with bright crimson blood. I watched her mutilate her own flesh with the cold, clinical detachment of a veteran investigator auditing a forged ledger. She did not even wince. With her arm bleeding freely, Chloe took a deep theatrical breath. She threw her upper body backward intentionally, collapsing her knees, and let gravity pull her down the remaining 3 steps. She landed on the hard marble floor with a loud, sickening thud that echoed violently against the high ceilings of the foyer. For a fraction of a second, she simply lay there on the cold stone, ensuring the physical impact had left a convincing mark. Then she unleashed a piercing, blood-curdling scream that shattered the quiet afternoon. Her shrieks were masterful, filled with perfectly modulated tones of absolute terror and agonizing pain. She writhed on the marble, clutching her bleeding forearm, kicking her bare feet against the base of the staircase to create as much chaotic noise as humanly possible. I stayed exactly where I was, the dusting cloth still loosely gripped in my fingers, offering neither rescue nor reaction as I waited for the second act of their desperate play to begin. The heavy double doors of Terrence's home office burst open with explosive force. He sprinted out into the hallway, his dress shirt partially unbuttoned, his face arranged into a mask of total frantic shock. He slid to his knees beside his wife on the marble floor, his hands hovering over her deliberately scratched arm. "What happened?" he shouted, his voice echoing loudly in the open space. "Chloe, what did she do to you?" "She pushed me," Chloe wailed, fresh, crocodile tears streaming down her carefully contoured cheeks. Her voice hitched with fabricated trauma as she pointed a trembling, blood-stained finger directly at my chest. I was just walking down the stairs to ask if she wanted some tea, and she just snapped. She looked right through me. She did not even know who I was. She just shoved me backward. "Terrence, she is completely out of her mind." Terrence slowly stood up, turning his body to face me. He positioned himself between me and his weeping wife, playing the role of the reluctant, heartbroken protector to absolute perfection. He looked at me with deep, manufactured sorrow, shaking his head slowly. "Mom, I cannot believe it has come to this," he whispered, his voice trembling with fake devastation. "You attacked my wife. You drew blood. You are completely losing your grip on reality." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his smartphone, holding it up so the bright screen reflected the afternoon light. He unlocked the device, his thumb hovering menacingly over the digital keypad. "I have to call the police, Mom," he continued, his tone turning grave and urgent. "I have to report an elder-induced domestic assault. Do you have any idea what the state does to violent, financially independent seniors with cognitive decline? They will arrest you. They will place you in a mandatory psychiatric hold. A judge will strip away every single one of your civil rights before the sun goes down today. You will be locked in a secure medical ward, and your assets will be completely seized by the county to cover your state-mandated care." I kept my hands visibly shaking, letting my lower lip tremble as I stared at the phone in his hand. "But I can protect you," Terrence said, stepping closer, lowering his voice into a soothing, manipulative purr. He pointed toward the kitchen counter, where the heavy legal folder the fake doctor had abandoned yesterday was conveniently resting. "I can keep the authorities out of this. I can keep this entirely in the family, just like Dad would have wanted. But you have to let me take the wheel right now. You have to sign that power of attorney document so I can legally manage your medical care and protect your accounts from being frozen by the state. Sign the paper. Mom and I will put the phone away. Chloe will not press charges. I will save you." I was giving me the ultimate ultimatum: surrender my entire financial empire to him voluntarily, or he would use his wife's self-inflicted wounds to have me legally incarcerated by the state. I let my knees buckle just slightly, forcing a sharp, ragged gasp of air into my lungs. I raised my trembling hands to my face, mimicking the exact physiological signs of a profound, overwhelming panic attack. I allowed a single, highly convincing tear to spill over my eyelid and run down my wrinkled cheek. "Please," I whimpered, my voice small, fractured, and steeped in absolute terror. "Please do not call the police, Terrence. I do not remember pushing her. I do not remember what happened. Please just keep me out of the hospital." Terrence's eyes gleamed with raw, unadulterated triumph. The sheer greed radiating from his posture was almost blinding. He practically lunged toward the kitchen counter, grabbing the thick power of attorney packet and a hard clipboard. He marched back over to me, shoving the heavy document directly into my trembling hands. He pointed to the 3 signature lines at the very bottom of the final page, highlighting the specific areas where I was signing away my wealth, my medical autonomy, and my legal rights. "Just sign it, Mom," he urged, his voice breathless with anticipation. "Sign it right now, and everything will be perfectly fine." I reached into the deep front pocket of my cardigan and pulled out my own personal fountain pen. My hand shook violently as I brought the silver tip down to the paper. I pressed hard, dragging the ink across the designated lines, leaving a bold, undeniable signature on every single required page. The moment I completed the final stroke, Terrence snatched the clipboard right out of my hands. He did not even bother checking on his bleeding wife. He simply stared down at the fresh ink, a wide, euphoric smile spreading across his face. He had won. He officially owned my entire life. I turned away, keeping my shoulders hunched in defeat, and shuffled slowly down the hallway toward the guest room. I closed the heavy wooden door behind me, engaging the lock with a soft click. I turned around to find my grandson Malik sitting casually on the edge of the mattress. The moment the lock engaged, I dropped my hunched posture entirely. My spine straightened into a rigid line of absolute authority. I wiped the fake tear from my cheek and let a cold, genuine smile touch the corners of my mouth. Malik stood up, a massive, victorious grin breaking across his youthful face, and held up his hand. I met his palm with a firm, resounding high five. I reached into my pocket and tossed the silver fountain pen onto the bedspread. After Malik uncovered the conservatorship plan, he had found a specialty security ink product online and sent the information to Vance. Vance's office arranged for the pen to reach us before the staged confrontation. The ink looked completely ordinary when it touched paper, which was exactly why Terrence had accepted the signatures without hesitation. The formula was designed to fade gradually after exposure to air. For the first several hours, the writing remained dark enough to appear permanent, but over roughly 48 hours, it would lose its color until the signature lines looked untouched. It was not our legal defense. Vance had already prepared the real protections. It was simply the bait that allowed Terrence to believe he had succeeded long enough to keep revealing his intentions. By the time Terrence planned to carry the original power of attorney into the bank, he would be holding pages whose most important lines no longer displayed my signature. He thought the document represented control. In reality, it represented evidence of coercion, and every hour he trusted it gave Vance more time to secure my accounts and preserve the forged loan records. For the next hour, I remained in my room and listened to the house settle into a strange, triumphant quiet. Terrence and Chloe believed they had finally broken me. Through the wall, I heard a cabinet door open, then the metallic clunk of the home office safe. Terrence had locked the power of attorney inside, instead of scanning or filing it immediately exactly as Malik had predicted. He wanted to present the original document at the bank after I was removed from the house, assuming the physical pages would look more convincing than an electronic copy. That arrogance gave the disappearing ink time to do its work. Celebration could wait. A trick was only useful if the larger strategy around it was sound. I photographed the faint scratches Chloe had left on her own arm before she could later change the story. Wrote down the exact time of the staged fall, and recorded a private statement describing where I had been standing when she threw herself down the last 3 steps. I sent the notes to Vance so they carried a timestamp outside the house. Then I sat beside Malik and made him repeat in his own words what he had witnessed and what he had not witnessed. I wanted him protected from any suggestion that I had coached him. He had seen the planning documents and the aftermath. He had not been in the foyer when Chloe fell. Facts mattered. Exaggeration was how people like Terrence destroyed themselves. Vance called back shortly before midnight. The bank's fraud unit had placed a confidential hold on the $400,000 commercial loan after comparing the forged signature with verified samples from my accounts. No money would be released. More importantly, the bank had preserved the application, the digital submission records, and the identifying information used to file it. For the first time since Malik had shown me the conservatorship petition, I felt the ground beneath me become solid again. Terrence could still cause pain, but he could no longer erase the evidence. Vance advised me not to touch the power of attorney in the safe and not to provoke another confrontation. Let them believe the coercion succeeded, he said. Let them keep moving. Every additional step they take now makes their intent clearer. I ended the call and looked at the silver pen on my nightstand. 48 hours suddenly felt like a very long time. outside my door. I heard Chloe laugh and Terrence open a bottle of champagne. They were toasting to control they did not possess. I turned off the lamp and slept with the calm of a woman who knew the next move belonged to her. I stepped out of the vehicle in the heart of the financial district. I smoothed my tailored navy suit and walked through the towering glass doors of the private wealth management firm. The receptionist recognized me instantly, guiding me to the secure elevator. I rode up to the 40th floor in complete silence, my mind calculating the precise variables of the trap I was about to spring. Attorney Vance was already waiting in his corner office when the heavy oak doors parted. His massive mahogany desk was covered in highly sensitive financial dossiers and property deeds. I took a seat opposite him and accepted the cup of black coffee his assistant had thoughtfully prepared. Vance did not waste a single second on pleasantries. He knew I operated entirely on facts and actionable intelligence. He pushed a thick manila folder across the polished wood surface toward me. The tab on the file bore my son's name in bold black letters. I opened the cover and began scanning the top sheet of the comprehensive asset audit. The numbers staring back at me painted a picture of absolute, unmitigated financial devastation. Terrence had spent the last 3 years parading around our social circles as a highly successful corporate consultant. He hosted lavish catered dinners, drove imported sports cars, and consistently bragged about his booming investment portfolio. The reality laid bare in the official bank records was a staggering illusion built entirely on a crumbling foundation of catastrophic debt. The sprawling luxury estate he and Chloe currently occupied, the very same house they were attempting to weaponize against me, did not actually belong to them. Vance tapped his expensive gold pen against the primary mortgage document. Terrence had stopped making his monthly payments exactly 18 months ago. The lending institution had granted him multiple extensions based on fabricated revenue projections he had submitted from his failing firm. Those extensions had officially expired. The massive property was currently entirely submerged in severe negative equity. He owed the bank nearly $2 million in principal, compounded by astronomical late fees and legal penalties. The bank had already finalized the preliminary foreclosure paperwork. According to the strict timeline established by the local county clerk, the sheriff's department was scheduled to execute a full mandatory eviction in exactly 30 days. Terrence was completely out of time, out of money, and out of leverage. His sudden, frantic push to have me declared legally incompetent and seize my massive retirement pension was not just a greedy power grab. It was a desperate, chaotic final attempt to generate the immediate liquid cash required to stop the impending foreclosure. He needed my lifetime of hard work to plug the fatal hole in his sinking ship. If he successfully filed the fraudulent power of attorney document he had forced me to sign on the staircase, he could legally liquidate my assets and wire the funds directly to the lending institution before the eviction notice was formally served. I traced the edge of the foreclosure notice with my index finger, feeling a deep, profound sense of professional validation. My decades of hunting corporate embezzlers had taught me that the loudest, most arrogant people in the room are always the ones drowning in the deepest debt. Terrence thought he had expertly backed me into an inescapable corner. He believed his brutal extortion tactic with Chloe on the stairs had secured his ultimate financial salvation. He had absolutely no idea that I possessed the complete, unredacted blueprint of his impending ruin. I closed the folder and looked up at Vance, my expression entirely devoid of any maternal pity or sorrow. The illusion my son had constructed was completely shattered. We now possessed the exact leverage required to orchestrate his total downfall. The time for passive observation was over. It was time to aggressively acquire his debt and permanently flip the balance of power. I took a slow, deep sip of my coffee, savoring the bitter taste. I instructed Vance to initiate the next phase of our operation. I needed to move with absolute precision to ensure my trap was entirely inescapable. My son had declared war on my livelihood, and I was going to finish it today. I instructed Vance to immediately contact the senior commercial lending officers at the National Bank currently holding my son's distressed mortgage. Simply paying off the outstanding balance would effectively hand him a free $2 million estate, validating his horrific behavior and rewarding his endless greed. I demanded a far more sophisticated and devastating financial maneuver. I told my attorney that I intended to formally purchase the actual promissory note directly from the bank's commercial real estate division. By legally acquiring the original debt instrument in its entirety, the bank would gladly wash their hands of the toxic non-performing asset, and I would instantly become the sole undisputed creditor holding the primary lien against the property. Vance steepled his fingers, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across his normally stoic face. He quickly pointed out that the bank would likely jump at the opportunity to offload a severely delinquent residential account without enduring the lengthy, expensive, and publicly embarrassing process of a forced foreclosure eviction. He warned me, however, that executing a direct purchase of a massive defaulted mortgage required absolute impenetrable anonymity. If Terrence or his increasingly frantic wife caught even the slightest wind that I was the mystery buyer sweeping in to acquire their loan, they would instantly suspect a trap and attempt to obstruct the transfer through a protracted legal injunction. To completely eliminate any possibility of my son discovering my involvement, I authorized Vance to immediately establish a completely secure, highly insulated blind trust. We selected a corporate moniker completely devoid of any familial connection. We registered the holding company under the name Onyx Holdings, LLC. The corporate structure was meticulously designed to ensure my identity as the primary shareholder and sole financial benefactor remained utterly untraceable, buried beneath multiple layers of legally binding non-disclosure agreements and offshore proxy directors. Onyx Holdings would act as my financial ghost, sweeping into the banking negotiations to quietly purchase the debt for $1.8 million in untraceable cash. I reached into my pristine leather briefcase and withdrew my secure authentication token. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner, generating the dynamic one-time authorization code required to unlock my primary investment portfolio. I verbally confirmed the staggering wire transfer, moving nearly $2 million of my own hard-earned capital into the escrow account managed by Onyx Holdings. I signed the heavy stack of authorization documents with a steady, unwavering hand. I felt absolutely no hesitation as I committed the funds. To the untrained eye, spending $2 million to acquire a distressed, upside-down residential mortgage might look like the foolish, sentimental act of a desperately enabling mother. But I was not enabling my son. I was methodically purchasing the heavy iron bars of his invisible cage. By owning the debt outright, I would completely bypass the standard consumer protection laws that govern traditional banking institutions. Onyx Holdings would not be bound by customary grace periods, polite warning letters, or standard negotiation tactics. I was legally structuring the debt transfer to include a highly aggressive specialized acceleration clause perfectly tailored to my impending retaliation. I finished signing the last page of the dense legal packet and slid the clipboard back across the desk to my attorney. Vance verified the signatures, stamped the documents with his official notary seal, and immediately scanned the forms directly to the bank's commercial lending department. He informed me that because we were offering a massive all-cash settlement for the non-performing asset, the banking executives would likely fast-track the internal approval process and execute the transfer of the deed within 48 hours. I leaned back in my comfortable chair and watched the bustling city traffic far below the office window. Terrence had spent his entire adult life aggressively manipulating people, treating his family members like disposable assets to fund his hollow, superficial existence. He had dared to try and steal my independence and lock me away in a dark room. Now, I was buying the very ground beneath his feet. I was meticulously transforming his greatest material vanity into the precise instrument of his total destruction. Exactly 48 hours after I transferred the capital, my secure cellular phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Vance. The National Lending Institution had eagerly accepted the massive cash buyout without raising a single bureaucratic objection. The complex financial paperwork had completely cleared the county clerk's office, officially closing the institutional loophole. The heavy, beautiful, gold-embossed property deed was now legally registered, entirely under the protective umbrella of Onyx Holdings, LLC. I was officially my son's sole creditor, his absolute landlord, and the undisputed legal owner of the sprawling estate he falsely claimed to possess. I had successfully captured his entire existence inside an airtight, legally binding vault. Vance sent a digital confirmation displaying the final transfer. I opened the file on my laptop in the quiet isolation of my room, tracing the official county seal with profound vindication. I was no longer a helpless, isolated victim, simply waiting to be mercilessly exploited by my own greedy family. I was a highly trained apex predator patiently and silently circling an inescapable trap. I carefully locked my dark screen and headed slowly downstairs. That same afternoon, I was sitting quietly at the kitchen island, methodically chopping fresh vegetables for a quiet lunch, maintaining my flawless performance as the subservient, compliant grandmother. I heard the sudden thunderous thud of heavy footsteps sprinting down the grand wooden staircase. Terrence burst into the kitchen, his eyes wide and completely manic. He was gripping his smartphone so tightly his knuckles were stark white. He practically shoved the device into Chloe's face as she sat at the breakfast bar scrolling through her social media feed. His voice trembled with overwhelming, unadulterated euphoria as he announced that a miraculous financial firm had just bought out his toxic mortgage from the bank. He loudly shouted across the room that this mysterious and incredibly wealthy new investment group, Onyx Holdings, had just sent him an official email approving an immediate comprehensive restructuring of his severely delinquent debt. Chloe let out a piercing, triumphant shriek, leaping from her bar stool to wrap her arms aggressively around his neck. They danced together on the expensive imported tiles, laughing hysterically and celebrating their supposed financial salvation. They genuinely believed a random, generous corporate entity had blindly swooped in to rescue them from the very brink of catastrophic ruin. They cheered about their incredibly good fortune, loudly boasting that they were finally untouchable and immune to all consequences. I continued chopping my vegetables with slow, deliberate precision. I kept my head bowed, allowing a small, invisible smile to grace my lips as I listened to their pathetic, misguided celebration. They were completely blissfully unaware of the incredibly deadly fine print buried deep within the newly issued contract Terrence had just blindly accepted via electronic signature. The restructuring agreement included a highly specialized, absolutely lethal fraud acceleration clause crafted specifically by my attorney. The clause explicitly stated that any documented instance of financial manipulation, forged signatures, or identity theft would instantly nullify the entire agreement, immediately granting Onyx Holdings the unquestionable legal right to execute a zero-day eviction without any right to appeal. Terrence had just willingly signed a document that gave me the supreme, unchallenged authority to throw him out onto the street the exact second I exposed his forged loan application. I slowly and perfectly sliced cleanly through a bright red ripe tomato, my movements completely steady. The luxury vacation they were currently planning would actually be arranged by the federal penal system. His entire pathetic, miserable life right now rested softly and permanently in the palm of my hand. The sharp and mechanical whine of a heavy hydraulic winch shattered the quiet tranquility of the following Tuesday morning. I stood at the large bay window in the kitchen, holding a freshly brewed cup of espresso, and watched a massive commercial flatbed tow truck reverse slowly into the center of the circular driveway. Strapped securely to the heavy steel bed of the truck was a brand new factory, pristine Porsche Panamera, its sleek black paint gleaming aggressively in the early sunlight. Terrence practically sprinted out the front double doors, his leather loafers slipping slightly on the manicured stone walkway. He was vibrating with manic energy, waving his hands wildly to direct the delivery driver. He had not suddenly generated a legitimate stream of corporate revenue overnight. He had simply utilized the false sense of security provided by his newly restructured mortgage to immediately secure a highly predatory, incredibly high-interest auto lease. He was celebrating his ultimate financial survival by instantly digging a brand new, wildly expensive grave. Chloe emerged from the house moments later, holding her smartphone high in the air to ensure the delivery driver and the luxury vehicle were perfectly framed in her digital broadcast. She shrieked with manufactured delight, running her hands over the glossy hood of the sports car while posing dramatically for her virtual audience. She paused her recording just long enough to accept a small, velvet-covered box from a private courier who had pulled up directly behind the tow truck. I watched from behind the glass as she popped the heavy lid open, revealing a glittering diamond-encrusted tennis necklace that caught the morning light and fractured it into a dozen tiny rainbows. She immediately clasped the $10,000 piece of jewelry around her neck, twirling in the driveway for her followers, entirely oblivious to the catastrophic reality of her situation. Within the hour, a fleet of commercial delivery vans began arriving at the property in rapid succession. Two men in matching uniforms carefully unloaded cases of imported vintage champagne, stacking the heavy wooden crates directly in the formal dining room. A high-end floral design team arrived next, carrying massive, towering arrangements of white orchids and rare imported lilies, shedding delicate petals across the marble foyer. Chloe barked sharp, condescending orders at the delivery workers, waving her diamond-adorned wrist in the air as she directed them to place the exorbitant floral displays on every available flat surface. Terrence strutted back into the house, tossing the heavy key fob of his new sports car onto the kitchen island. He picked up his phone and loudly booked a premium private suite for a 2-week vacation to the Maldives, casually charging the massive expense to a newly opened credit account. They were aggressively insulating themselves in a fragile bubble of extreme luxury, fully convinced that their financial future was permanently secured by the legal trap they thought they had set for me. I remained perfectly silent, moving gracefully through the chaotic house, watching them pile heavy, expensive stones onto a glass floor that was already fracturing beneath their feet. That evening, the house finally fell quiet as Terrence and Chloe retreated to the home office to finalize their paperwork. Malik slipped silently down the back staircase, moving with the practiced stealth of a shadow. He held a tiny coin-sized audio transmitter tightly in his left hand. I watched from the hallway alcove as my grandson deftly bypassed the heavy oak door of the office, slipping the microscopic listening device directly into the slatted ventilation grate just above the wooden baseboard. He retreated to my guest room, opening his encrypted laptop and establishing a secure localized connection to the hidden microphone. The audio feed crackled to life with crystal-clear precision. The sound of Terrence pouring a heavy glass of scotch echoed through the small speakers, followed by the sharp rustle of thick legal documents being sorted across a desk. I sat beside Malik, listening intently as my son and his wife callously negotiated the exact terms of my impending incarceration. Terrence confidently announced that the emergency conservatorship petition was finalized and ready for immediate submission to the county magistrate first thing Monday morning. Chloe's voice cut through the feed sharp and utterly devoid of human empathy. She demanded to know the exact timeline for my physical removal from the property. Terrence calmly explained his precise logistical strategy. He confirmed he had already secured a mandatory bed for me at Oak Ridge State Medical Facility, a notoriously grim, severely underfunded public institution located 3 hours deep into the remote countryside. He detailed his plan to forcibly transport me to the facility on Sunday afternoon under the strict guise of a routine medical evaluation. He explicitly instructed Chloe to have my bags completely packed and waiting by the side door. Once I was safely locked behind the heavy security doors of the state ward, he planned to march directly into the bank on Monday morning, present his newly acquired power of attorney, and systematically liquidate my entire corporate pension fund to cover their explosive new debts. Chloe let out a cruel, triumphant laugh, loudly celebrating the fact that they would finally have the massive house entirely to themselves. They casually dismissed my entire existence, plotting to throw me into a sterile, heavily medicated nightmare without a single ounce of hesitation or remorse. Malik clenched his jaw, his dark eyes burning with profound, silent anger, as he saved the devastating audio file directly to our secure, encrypted external drive. Listening to that recording changed something in Malik. Until then, he had treated our plan like an urgent technical problem, a set of files to secure and facts to organize. When he heard his father describe Sunday as if he were scheduling a furniture delivery, the boy's face tightened. He removed the headphones and asked me a question I had been avoiding, whether Terrence had always been this way. I told him the truth without trying to rescue his father's image. Terrence had not been born cruel. As a younger man, he had been ambitious, charming, and terrified of appearing unsuccessful. Over time, embarrassment became entitlement. Every time I covered a missed payment or solved a crisis quietly, he learned the wrong lesson. He stopped seeing help as generosity and began seeing it as something owed to him. Chloe had not created that weakness, but together they had turned it into a lifestyle. I told Malik that understanding how someone became dangerous did not require us to stand still while they hurt us. He stared at the saved audio file for a long moment, then closed the laptop. I could see the grief beneath his anger. His father was planning to discard his grandmother, but Malik was also realizing how easily a man could discard anyone who no longer served his image. The next day gave us further proof of how detached Terrence and Chloe had become from consequence. The Porsche sat in the driveway like a monument to borrowed confidence. Chloe spent nearly an hour photographing herself beside it, changing coats between shots so she could post the images over several days and make the purchase look like part of an effortless life. Inside, unopened bills had begun accumulating beneath a decorative bowl near the office door. A courier delivered a warning from one of Terrence's vendors, and he shoved the envelope into a drawer without reading it. Every visible sign of trouble was hidden, while every visible sign of wealth was amplified. I watched the performance and finally understood why the Saturday gala mattered so much to them. It was not merely an anniversary party. Terrence planned to use the room full of investors as social proof that his new consulting branch was thriving. Chloe intended to turn the night into content that would attract sponsors and wealthy clients. They were betting their future on one perfect public image. That made the party more than a celebration. It made it the only place where the truth could reach every person they had misled at once. By then, I was no longer keeping the authorities entirely outside the plan. Once the bank had preserved the forged loan package and Vance had secured my accounts, he advised me that delaying a formal report served no further protective purpose. I agreed. Through Vance, I provided the county sheriff's investigators with the conservatorship papers, the bank's fraud referral, the public records concerning Cole, and my written account of the coercion at the staircase. I asked no one to manufacture an arrest for spectacle. My instruction was simple: follow the evidence and be ready if lawful process permitted action. Vance kept the details from me after that, partly because he did not want my decisions shaped by expectations about an arrest. All I needed to know was that the record no longer existed only on Malik's laptop or inside my private files. If Terrence tried to remove me from the house on Sunday, there would be adults outside the family who already knew what he had been planning. The following morning, I pulled my heavy vintage leather suitcase from the top shelf of the guest room closet and placed it firmly on the mattress. I began methodically folding my tailored blouses and silk scarves, packing my belongings with slow, deliberate movements. The bedroom door creaked open. Chloe leaned lazily against the wooden doorframe, holding a crystal glass of sparkling water. The massive diamond necklace she had purchased the day before glittered brightly against her collarbone. She watched me stack my clothes, a wicked, deeply satisfied smirk spreading across her heavily contoured face. "I am so incredibly glad you are finally getting ready for your little vacation." "B," she sneered, her voice dripping with venomous sarcasm. "Terrence found a wonderful quiet place for you to go rest. You are going to have so much free time to just sit and stare at the walls." My hands kept folding the cashmere sweater, as though she had commented on the weather. After smoothing a small wrinkle from the fabric, I finally looked up and offered her a warm, perfectly serene smile. "Oh, I am not packing for a vacation, Chloe," I replied, my voice light and completely unbothered. "I am just taking inventory and making absolutely sure the trash is properly taken out." Her arrogant smile faltered for a fraction of a second, completely unable to comprehend my absolute lack of fear. She quickly recovered her arrogant posture, taking a slow sip from her crystal glass. "Well, make sure you are completely packed by tomorrow night," she commanded sharply. "We are throwing a massive anniversary and business launch gala here on Saturday evening. We have over 150 high society guests, local politicians, and major corporate investors arriving at 7 o'clock. We are officially unveiling Terrence's new executive consulting branch, and we absolutely cannot have you wandering around the party in your housecoat confusing the guests." She casually informed me that a professional catering crew would be taking over the entire kitchen by noon tomorrow, explicitly ordering me to remain completely confined to the guest bedroom until the party was over. She boasted that a local magazine photographer would be documenting the lavish event, securing their place among the city's financial elite. I gently zipped the heavy brass zippers of my leather suitcase, securing my belongings perfectly. I looked directly into her eyes, maintaining my flawless, serene expression. I told her I would stay entirely out of the way until the absolute perfect moment. She rolled her eyes, scoffing loudly as she turned and strutted down the hallway to continue barking orders at her florists. She was throwing the most expensive, highly publicized party of her entire life, completely unaware that she had just hand-delivered me the perfect captive audience for her impending execution. The sun barely crested the horizon on Saturday morning before the chaotic symphony of commercial delivery trucks began echoing through the circular driveway. I stood in the kitchen dressed in a plain gray sweater and modest slacks, watching the frantic preparations for the massive anniversary and business launch gala. Chloe swept into the room clutching an oversized tablet, her face tight with manic, frantic energy. She did not offer a greeting. She simply pointed a sharply manicured finger toward a towering stack of tarnished silver platters and antique serving trays resting on the granite island. She commanded me to begin polishing every single piece until I could see my reflection in the metal. She loudly announced that she refused to let her high society friends eat from dull silver simply because I was too lazy to earn my keep. A meek nod was my only answer. I picked up the heavy rag and the pungent chemical polish, applying myself to the physical labor with chilling, absolute obedience. My silence seemed to embolden her cruelty. She marched over to a dozen massive buckets of imported white roses and hydrangeas sitting on the floor, kicking one of the plastic containers with her designer shoe. She ordered me to individually trim and arrange over 400 stems for the dining centerpieces the exact moment I finished the silver. I nodded meekly, keeping my eyes cast downward, masking the cold, calculating satisfaction burning in my chest. She was standing in a house legally owned by Onyx Holdings, treating the sole proprietor of the estate like an indentured servant. I rubbed the dark tarnish from a heavy gravy boat, watching my distorted reflection slowly clear into sharp focus. About an hour into my grueling labor, Chloe returned to the kitchen with her smartphone mounted to a portable stabilizer. She hit the record button and immediately plastered a fake, exaggerated smile across her face. She walked right up to my shoulder, ensuring my tired posture and working hands were perfectly captured in the frame of her video. She spoke directly to her followers, her voice dripping with toxic performative sweetness. She told her digital audience that it was so incredibly important to keep the elderly active and moving, boasting about how she had kindly assigned her supposedly helpless grandmother a few simple household chores to keep her fragile mind occupied. She actually reached out and patted me on the head like an obedient dog. I kept my breathing steady and rhythmic. I continued wiping the silver tray, applying long, deliberate strokes, ensuring the camera captured my utter compliance. I knew this video would eventually serve as the final devastating nail in her social coffin. Let her film. Let her broadcast her horrific vanity to the entire world. Every single frame of her documented abuse was only adding exponential weight to the hammer I was preparing to drop on her reality. She pranced out of the kitchen, loudly reviewing her own footage, completely oblivious to the fact that she was enthusiastically documenting her own impending destruction. I moved on to the towering buckets of white roses. I selected the sharpest pair of pruning shears from the counter and began cleanly snapping the thick green stems. The rhythmic sound of the metal blades slicing through the foliage was deeply therapeutic. I arranged the pristine white blossoms into the tall crystal vases with meticulous, unwavering precision. I was effectively arranging the funeral flowers for their fraudulent marriage and their entirely fabricated empire. I arranged each petal perfectly, ensuring the grand ballroom would look absolutely flawless for the brutal financial execution I had scheduled for later that evening. The physical labor did not drain my energy. It focused my mind, sharpening my resolve into an unbreakable diamond-hard edge. The chaotic preparations spilled over into the grand ballroom just past noon. A commercial event rental company arrived in a fleet of white vans to deliver the professional audio and visual equipment Terrence had demanded for his big presentation. They hauled in massive high-definition projector screens, a premium surround sound speaker system, and a complicated digital mixing board. Terrence was pacing frantically across the polished marble floor, barking contradictory orders at the exhausted technicians and loudly complaining about the placement of the overhead lighting. He was far too absorbed in micromanaging the visual aesthetics of the room to actually handle the technical integration of the expensive equipment. Malik seized the perfect opportunity. He walked quietly down the grand staircase carrying his heavy, nondescript black backpack and approached his father. He offered a shy, helpful smile, suggesting that he could take over the complex digital wiring so Terrence could focus on greeting the early arrival of the corporate investors. Terrence, eager to wash his hands of any actual physical labor, dismissed his son with a careless wave and immediately marched off to scream at the catering director about the temperature of the appetizers. Malik did not waste a single fraction of a second. He dropped his backpack behind the heavy black curtain of the main audio-visual booth and pulled out his specialized, heavily encrypted laptop. I stood near the entryway, discreetly adjusting a massive floral arrangement, watching my grandson operate with the swift, silent grace of a ghost. He systematically bypassed the standard commercial routing hub provided by the rental technicians. He pulled a thick bundle of specialized interface cables from his bag and physically wired the massive projector screens and the entire surround sound system directly into his own local, heavily secured machine. He isolated the connection, effectively cutting off any external access from the main house router or any Bluetooth override attempts. He then quickly ran a custom diagnostic script, his fingers flying across the glowing keyboard, to establish a lethal, unblockable digital choke point. I was building an absolute bottleneck. Whoever controlled that single laptop controlled every single pixel of light and every single decibel of sound in the entire ballroom. I watched him briefly test the kill switch, the massive projector screen flickering to black for a microsecond before returning to the default standby corporate logo Terrence had requested. He looked up, his eyes catching mine across the vast, empty ballroom. He gave me a barely perceptible nod, his face an impenetrable mask of pure concentration. Malik methodically taped down the thick black wires, hiding the evidence of his technological sabotage beneath a heavy decorative rug. He secured the primary power source to a battery backup, ensuring that even if Terrence attempted to physically pull the plug from the wall outlet, in a moment of sheer panic, the broadcast would continue completely uninterrupted. He closed his laptop screen just far enough to obscure the running code, leaving it resting innocuously on the shadowed table. The digital trap was firmly in place, armed, and completely inescapable. Chloe and Terrence had invested thousands of dollars to build a massive, unavoidable stage for their grand social debut, completely unaware that my brilliant grandson now held the only functional remote control to their entire presentation. The late afternoon sun began to sink below the manicured tree line, casting long, dramatic shadows across the freshly polished floors of the estate. The grand ballroom was completely transformed, waiting in pristine, absolute perfection for the arrival of the wealthy guests. I was walking quietly toward the back hallway to retrieve a fresh stack of linen napkins when Terrence suddenly blocked my path. He had just changed into a custom-tailored midnight blue tuxedo that stretched slightly over his shoulders. He smelled overwhelmingly of expensive cologne and cheap, desperate arrogance. He looked down at me, his eyes entirely devoid of any residual familial warmth or basic human decency. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his jacket and pulled out a glossy trifold brochure. He shoved the stiff paper directly against my chest, forcing me to take it. I looked down at the cover. It displayed a grainy, poorly lit photograph of the Oak Ridge State Medical Facility, the notoriously grim, severely underfunded institution they had discussed on the hidden audio recording. The building looked like a depressing concrete prison surrounded by dying grass. Terrence leaned in uncomfortably close, his hot breath brushing my cheek, ensuring his voice did not carry to the bustling caterers working diligently in the adjacent dining room. "Have your bags completely packed and sitting by the side door by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, Mom," he whispered, his tone brutally cold and completely unyielding. "The medical transport van will be here right after breakfast to come pick you up. Do not try to fight this process or make a scene. We already have the signed power of attorney document safely secured in the safe, and the county doctors have completely signed off on the mandatory transfer protocol. You are going to go quietly, and you are going to get the permanent psychiatric help you so desperately need. It is entirely for your own good." I looked down at the glossy paper resting in my hands, absorbing the sheer, unadulterated cruelty of his absolute betrayal. He was standing in a house I legally owned, casually informing me of my impending permanent incarceration as if he were discussing a minor change in the weather. My face remained still, and my hands stayed steady. I looked up at the man I had raised from an infant, a man who was now actively trying to destroy my life for profit, and offered him a slow, terrifyingly serene smile. "I understand completely, Terrence," I replied smoothly, my voice as calm and placid as a frozen lake. "I will make sure absolutely everything is exactly where it needs to be tomorrow morning." He smirked, a foul, self-satisfied expression twisting his features. He clearly mistook my calm compliance for total broken defeat. He adjusted his silk lapel with a smug twitch of his wrist and strutted off toward the ballroom to await his adoring public. I turned on my heel and walked directly into my private guest bathroom, locking the heavy door with a solid, definitive click. I turned on the brass sink faucet, letting the water run loudly into the basin to mask any potential sound. I reached past the folded towels and pulled my secure, unregistered phone from the deep pocket of my slacks. I opened my encrypted messaging application and navigated to the secure group thread containing Attorney Vance and the local county sheriff, a man I had thoroughly briefed on the impending financial fraud several days ago. My thumb hovered over the glowing digital keyboard for only a fraction of a second. I typed a single definitive sentence into the chat box. "It is time. Bring the handcuffs." I pressed send, watching the small delivery checkmark appear instantly on the screen. I dropped the phone back into my pocket, turned off the rushing water, and threw the glossy nursing home brochure directly into the bottom of the garbage can. The time for silent observation was officially over. The secure text message successfully transmitted. I placed the phone gently onto the marble vanity. The heavy rhythmic bass of a professional string quartet warming up drifted through the thick floorboards. Outside the frosted glass window of the guest bathroom, the sweeping circular driveway was rapidly filling with a fleet of high-end vehicles. Valets in crisp white shirts darted efficiently between arriving luxury sedans and imported sports cars. 150 of the city's most affluent, painfully pretentious socialites were currently streaming through the front doors of my property. They were completely unaware they were stepping directly into an active, highly volatile financial crime scene. I opened the discreet garment bag I had smuggled into the room 3 days prior. I removed the protective plastic from a pristine, custom-tailored emerald green knit suit. I laid the expensive garments across the bed with absolute reverence. I was permanently shedding the drab gray sweaters and sensible slacks of the fragile, fading grandmother. I was arming myself for corporate warfare. By 7 o'clock, the foyer had become a river of tuxedos, silk gowns, perfume, and polished laughter. Valets opened car doors beneath the portico, while caterers moved between the kitchen and ballroom carrying trays of champagne. Chloe positioned herself near the entrance, so every guest had to pass through the frame of her live broadcast before entering. She greeted people with extravagant familiarity, calling executives by their first names and introducing local officials as dear friends, whether they appeared comfortable with the description or not. Each time the camera swung toward the staircase, I remained out of sight. From my room, I could hear the rising noise of a crowd assembled to admire a fortune that did not exist. Malik sent me brief updates from the audiovisual booth. System stable. Evidence queued. Backup power active. I replied with only one word, good. Emotion had no place in the final preparation for him or for me. Terrence moved through the ballroom with a glass in his hand, accepting congratulations on the new consulting branch before it had earned $1. He had placed glossy brochures on every cocktail table, each one filled with grand promises, vague strategy language, and photographs of offices he did not own. I recognized several bankers in the crowd, 2 real estate developers, and people who had trusted his claims because they assumed someone living in a house like this must be successful. That assumption was the engine of his entire fraud. Wealth created the appearance of credibility, and borrowed credibility created access to more debt. I had spent my career watching schemes built on the same circular logic. The difference was that this time the man at the center of the ledger was my son. Chloe's live audience climbed rapidly as more guests arrived. She announced that the evening would reveal an exciting new chapter for the Brooks family and promised her followers a major announcement during Terrence's toast. She never mentioned the frozen credit card, the unpaid mortgage, the forged loan, or the woman she had spent the morning calling a maid. To her, truth was whatever survived inside the camera frame. I stood before the mirror in my room and listened as the applause below grew louder. For a moment, grief pressed harder than anger. I remembered Terrence as a child standing on a kitchen chair so he could help me stir pancake batter. I remembered teaching him to balance a checkbook, insisting that numbers told the truth even when people did not. Somewhere along the way, he had decided numbers were obstacles to be manipulated. I allowed myself that memory for a few seconds, then put it away. Nostalgia could explain why this hurt. It could not be allowed to decide what happened next. On the nightstand, my secondary phone vibrated softly. Malik had sent a secure encrypted link to Chloe's public social media broadcast. I tapped the screen and watched my daughter-in-law hold court in the grand foyer. She was wearing a sequined gown that dipped dangerously low, clutching a glass of vintage champagne. Her voice echoed through the device, bright, manic, and incredibly loud. She panned the camera around the vaulted ceilings, bragging to her 100,000 digital followers about the incredible success of Terrence's consulting firm. She proudly welcomed her audience to what she called their self-made empire. She boasted extensively about the imported floral arrangements and the exorbitant catering spread, claiming every single detail was a testament to their relentless hard work and brilliant investment strategies. I watched her parade through the crowded ballroom, kissing the cheeks of local politicians and wealthy real estate developers. She cornered a prominent city councilman, thrusting her phone into his personal space to ensure her followers saw exactly who she was rubbing elbows with. She painted a flawless picture of absolute, unshakable generational wealth. The sheer, terrifying delusion of her performance was almost majestic. She was a woman drowning in $2 million of highly accelerated predatory debt, standing in a house owned entirely by a blind trust, bragging about her financial genius to a live audience. I sat down at the vanity mirror and began applying my makeup. I took my time. I applied a sharp, flawless wing of eyeliner and a deep, rich shade of plum lipstick. I secured my silver hair into an elegant, authoritative twist that exposed my neck. I reached into the velvet-lined travel case resting at the bottom of my bag and pulled out the absolute centerpiece of my ensemble. It was a flawless, custom-designed diamond collar necklace valued at over $50,000. It was an anniversary gift from my late husband, a piece I had kept securely locked in a downtown bank vault for over a decade. I fastened the heavy platinum clasp. The brilliant cut stones rested heavily against my collarbone, catching the bathroom lighting and throwing sharp, dazzling refractions across the painted walls. Chloe had proudly paraded her $10,000 credit-funded trinket all week long. I was about to show her what actual debt-free generational wealth truly looked like. The muffled sound of a silver spoon clinking sharply against crystal echoed through the floorboards, instantly cutting through the low hum of 100 aristocratic voices. The string quartet abruptly ceased playing. I picked up my phone to watch the live feed as Terrence confidently strode onto the elevated stage the rental company had constructed at the far end of the ballroom. He stood behind a clear acrylic podium, adjusting the lapels of his midnight blue tuxedo. A professional spotlight illuminated him perfectly against the darkened room. He looked out over the massive sea of wealthy investors and prominent socialites, offering a humble, perfectly practiced smile. He welcomed everyone to the gala, his voice projecting smoothly through the high-end surround sound system that Malik had secretly hardwired to his own encrypted laptop. He thanked his beautiful wife, Chloe, blowing her a kiss that she eagerly captured on her ongoing live stream. Then, he shifted his posture. He gripped the edges of the clear podium, lowered his head slightly, and allowed a carefully manufactured expression of profound sorrow to wash over his features. The transition was absolutely seamless. He told the captivated audience that tonight was not just about celebrating the massive, unprecedented success of his executive consulting branch. He claimed it was also about honoring the difficult, heartbreaking sacrifices that true family required. He started speaking about me. He fed the attentive crowd a sickeningly sweet, entirely fabricated narrative about how his beloved mother was rapidly fading into the dark, terrifying shadows of severe dementia. He painted himself as the valiant, heartbroken son who was sacrificing his own peace of mind, his sleep and his resources to provide round-the-clock care for a woman who barely recognized his face anymore. He described the agonizing pain of watching a brilliant mind deteriorate into nothingness. He lied through his teeth, claiming he had spared absolutely no expense to keep me comfortable in my final declining years. He smoothly informed his wealthy peers that he was currently in the painful process of securing a specialized full-time medical facility for my own safety. He wiped a completely dry eye, taking a dramatic pause to let the heavy, sympathetic silence fill the grand ballroom. The crowd murmured in collective awe. Several women in designer gowns actually pressed tissues to their faces, visibly moved to tears by his incredible display of filial devotion. I stood up from the vanity chair. I smoothed the emerald knit fabric of my skirt. I listened to my son solicit the pity and admiration of his peers by proudly announcing my impending incarceration. He was basking in the warm, approving glow of 150 powerful people, entirely convinced that his legal trap was already locked perfectly into place. He had built his entire towering pedestal on a foundation of absolute fraud. He was soaking up the applause, absorbing the validation of the city's elite, truly believing he had successfully discarded me like a piece of broken furniture. It was time to pull the heavy lever and open the trapdoor directly beneath his feet. I unlocked the heavy wooden door of the guest room and stepped out into the main hallway. The muted sounds of the party instantly became a roar of conversation and clinking glasses. I walked toward the grand sweeping marble staircase that overlooked the expansive ballroom. There was no creeping along the edges, no defeated shuffle in my step. I walked with the fluid, commanding grace of a woman who owned the very foundation of the building. I stepped onto the top landing and paused directly beneath the massive crystal chandelier. A caterer carrying a silver tray of champagne flutes noticed me first. He stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes wide. Then the wealthy guest standing nearest to the base of the stairs turned around. The reaction rippled through the massive crowd like a physical shockwave. The gentle murmurs of sympathy sparked by Terrence's beautiful speech abruptly died in their throats. The silence spread rapidly, suffocating the room, until the only sound left was the soft, rhythmic clicking of my heels descending the marble steps. I was not wearing the faded gray sweater. I was not hunched over in defeat. The $50,000 diamond collar caught the intense professional lighting of the ballroom, throwing brilliant, blinding flashes of light across the faces of the stunned elite. I looked exactly like a reigning corporate monarch stepping into a hostile boardroom. Chloe was standing near the front edge of the stage, her phone still raised high in the air, actively broadcasting to her massive digital audience. The blood completely drained from her heavily contoured face. Her jaw went completely slack. She lowered the device slightly, her eyes wide with absolute unadulterated terror as she took in my tailored suit and the aggressive, unmistakable clarity radiating from my posture. Terrence was still standing behind the acrylic podium. The fake, sorrowful smile froze on his face, rapidly decaying into a mask of pure, primal panic. He gripped the edges of the stand so tightly his knuckles turned stark white. He opened his mouth to speak, attempting to salvage his carefully constructed narrative, but his vocal cords completely failed him. I crossed the edge of the crowd and walked straight down the center aisle. The wealthy socialites, politicians, and corporate investors parted before me like the Red Sea, stepping back nervously to clear a wide path directly to the stage. I kept my eyes locked entirely on my son. I ascended the 3 short steps to the platform, moving with deliberate predatory calmness. I stepped directly into his spotlight. He was trembling. His entire body vibrated with the sudden catastrophic realization that the fragile glass floor beneath him was actively shattering into a million pieces. I reached out my hand, without asking permission. I firmly grasped the microphone and pulled it right out of his trembling, sweaty grip. The heavy microphone felt cool and solid in my grip. I turned my back on my son, leaving him staring blindly at his empty, trembling hand, and faced the sea of wide, stunned eyes. "My son talks a great deal about hard work," I said smoothly, my voice echoing with pristine, undeniable clarity through the massive ballroom speakers. "He speaks eloquently about sacrifice, familial devotion, and building a corporate empire from the ground up. Let us take a very close, highly detailed look at his actual portfolio." I gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod toward the darkened audio-visual booth at the back of the room. Malik did not hesitate. He hit the execution sequence on his encrypted laptop. The 3 massive high-definition projector screens positioned behind the stage violently flickered to life. They completely illuminated the dark ballroom with the stark, glaring white backgrounds of official banking documents. The crowd collectively gasped as the first file expanded to fill the center screen, displaying the bold red stamp of a major bank's collection department. I paced slowly across the polished stage, adopting the precise, authoritative cadence I had used to dismantle corrupt executives in federal courtrooms. "What you are currently looking at," I announced to the captive audience, "is a formal, finalized foreclosure notice. Terrence has not made a single mortgage payment on this spectacular luxury estate in exactly 18 months. He is currently submerged in over $2 million of highly accelerated, severely delinquent debt." Nervous, shocked murmurs rippled rapidly through the crowd of wealthy investors and local politicians. Terrence lunged forward, his face twisted in absolute panic, reaching frantically for the microphone. I simply sidestepped his clumsy grasp, leaving him stumbling awkwardly against the clear acrylic podium. The screens shifted instantly to the next heavily documented piece of evidence. The forged commercial loan application materialized in brilliant, undeniable clarity. To temporarily halt the impending seizure of this very property, I continued, my voice slicing effortlessly through the rising chaos in the room. My brilliant self-made son recently submitted this commercial loan application. He desperately requested a cash injection of $400,000. I directed their attention to the guarantor section of the document, which Malik had helpfully highlighted in bright neon yellow. As you can clearly read, he utilized my personal Social Security number and maliciously pledged my entire private corporate pension as the sole collateral for his failing, completely insolvent consulting firm. The murmurs in the crowd escalated into loud, horrified exclamations. Several prominent commercial bankers sitting in the front row visibly recoiled, instantly recognizing the severe federal felony displayed clearly before them. Terrence was hyperventilating, his chest heaving aggressively as he stared up at the digital evidence of his wire fraud broadcasted in 4K resolution. But his absolute masterpiece of deception was this final document, I stated coldly, gesturing to the main display. The screens shifted a third time, displaying the meticulously drafted emergency conservatorship petition and the accompanying medical power of attorney. He intended to file this exact paperwork on Monday morning, forcefully locking me inside a state-run psychiatric ward to gain unfettered, unchallenged access to my entire net worth. I turned to look directly at Terrence, who was currently sweating profusely under the intense, blinding stage lighting. I directed the crowd to look at the final signature page of the heavy legal document on the screen. Malik zoomed in closely on the designated authorization lines. They were completely, entirely blank. The specialized industrial ink I had used on the staircase just 48 hours prior had systematically broken down, responding to the natural humidity in the air, and evaporated completely into the atmosphere. There was not a single trace of residue left on the paper. Terrence stared up at the blank signature line, his eyes bulging in sheer, unadulterated horror as he finally realized his ultimate legal trap was completely void. He had successfully extorted me for absolutely nothing. From the far left side of the grand ballroom, a shrill, piercing scream ripped through the heavy tension. Chloe was sprinting aggressively in her tight sequined gown, shoving her way ruthlessly past a group of startled city councilmen. "Cut the feed," she shrieked hysterically, waving her arms wildly toward the rental technician standing near the back wall. "Turn those screens off right this second. Shut off the projectors immediately." The hired audiovisual team scrambled frantically, grabbing at the massive mixing board and ripping heavy power cords directly from the wall outlets. Their desperate efforts were entirely futile. Malik had bypassed their physical hardware, entirely routing the entire visual presentation through his own isolated battery-powered terminal, hidden safely behind the heavy black curtains. The massive screens remained glaringly bright, locked in an unyielding display of their absolute financial ruin. "Since we are discussing the incredible sacrifices of family," I said smoothly into the microphone, "let us listen to exactly how my loving daughter-in-law plans for the future." I signaled Malik a second time. The visual documents on the screens faded to a dark, menacing gray. The high-fidelity surround sound system crackled sharply. A localized, incredibly clear audio recording suddenly blasted through the heavy acoustic speakers, filling every single corner of the vast, cavernous ballroom. It was the exact conversation Malik had secretly recorded through the ventilation grate in the home office. Chloe's voice, cruel and utterly devoid of any basic human empathy, echoed loudly over the heads of her silent, horrified guests. "Make sure her bags are packed," the recorded voice of Chloe sneered through the premium speakers. "I want to drop the old bat at the state home before noon on Sunday. I cannot stand looking at her for one more second. Once she is locked up and medicated, we can finally liquidate the antique jewelry collection." A wealthy woman in the front row dropped her crystal champagne flute. It shattered sharply against the marble floor, the crisp sound punctuating the sheer horror of the audio playback. The physical reaction in the room was instantaneous and devastating. The elite socialites and prominent influencers who had been kissing Chloe's cheeks just moments ago began physically stepping away from her, treating her like an active, dangerous contagion. Pure disgust washed over their faces. Chloe froze in the center of the polished dance floor, her hands flying up to cover her mouth in absolute shock. In her blind, desperate panic to shut down the projectors, she had completely forgotten about the smartphone, still tightly clutched in her right hand. The phone was mounted to its stabilizing gimbal, the camera lens pointed directly at her horrified face, still actively broadcasting to Instagram Live. Over 50,000 strangers were currently watching the pristine, carefully curated illusion of her high society lifestyle violently detonate. The digital chat window on her glowing screen was scrolling so fast it was a blur of absolute outrage, with thousands of angry emojis and fiery condemnations flying across the display. Her followers were flooding the feed with accusations of elder abuse, tagging local news outlets, and screen recording the crisp audio of her vile, unmistakable confession. She looked down at the active broadcast, realizing the sheer, irreversible magnitude of her public exposure. She fumbled wildly with the device, her manicured fingers trembling so violently she could not manage to hit the end stream button. She dropped the heavy stabilizer. The phone hit the hard marble floor with a loud final crack, the screen fracturing into a dense spiderweb of broken glass, but the camera continued to roll from its skewed angle on the ground, capturing the legs of her former friends as they actively turned their backs on her. I stood perfectly still on the elevated stage, watching the total systematic destruction of her social empire. My voice remained level, and I offered no emotional commentary. I simply presented the raw, unfiltered evidence to the room and let the facts judge them. The devastating silence in the room following the audio playback was heavier than any shout or scream could ever be. They had invited the entire city to witness their ascension into the corporate elite, and instead, they had hosted the viral premiere of their own spectacular downfall. Terrence finally snapped. The immense crushing weight of his public exposure completely shattered his fragile, arrogant psyche. He let out a raw, guttural roar of pure animalistic rage and lunged forward across the stage. He did not care about the 150 powerful witnesses watching his every move. He did not care about the broken cameras on the floor. He closed the distance between us in 3 massive, aggressive strides, his hands balled into tight, violently shaking fists. "Get out of my house!" he screamed, his face a contorted mask of furious desperation. Spit flew from his lips as he pointed a trembling finger toward the main exit. "You are insane. You set me up. Get out of my house right now before I throw you out onto the street myself." I held my position with absolute finality. His physical intimidation could not move me. Every document, every recording, and every legal advantage was already on my side. I slowly reached into the interior breast pocket of my custom-tailored blazer. My movements were deliberately smooth and unhurried. I withdrew a thick, crisp legal document beautifully folded and heavily embossed with a golden county seal. "Your house," I asked, projecting my voice through the microphone so every single syllable resonated deep through his chest. I held the heavy parchment up directly under the bright stage spotlight. "Onyx Holdings bought your distressed defaulted debt 48 hours ago, Terrence. You willingly signed a restructuring agreement containing a 0-day eviction clause triggered instantly by any documented instance of financial fraud, forged loan applications, or identity theft." His aggressive posture immediately faltered. The primal rage in his eyes flickered, replaced rapidly by a sudden, terrifying confusion. He stared at the golden seal on the property deed, his mind struggling to process the fatal magnitude of his administrative error. "I am the sole proprietor of Onyx Holdings," I declared, coldly lowering the microphone just enough to let my natural, unamplified voice carry the final verdict across the quiet stage. "You do not own a single brick of this estate. I am your sole creditor. I am your absolute landlord. You are standing in my house, and your eviction notice is officially effective immediately." Terrence physically stumbled backward as if I had forcefully struck him in the chest. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing as his brain finally grasped the inescapable airtight vault I had locked him inside. Only a dry, pathetic wheeze escaped his throat. The heavy double doors of the ballroom swung inward, striking the padded walls with a definitive, resonant thud. I maintained my position on the elevated stage, offering a calm, impassive gaze as the absolute authority of the law flooded into my home. Attorney Vance led the procession, his dark suit impeccably pressed, holding a thick, securely bound stack of federal warrants. Flanking him were 4 uniformed county sheriff deputies, their heavy-duty boots stepping firmly onto the polished marble. The cacophony of panicked whispers among the elite guests died instantly, replaced by a tense, breathless silence. The deputies moved with tactical precision, ignoring the bewildered socialites as they formed a deliberate perimeter around the base of the stage. Terrence remained frozen near the acrylic podium, his furious red face draining entirely of color. His jaw worked soundlessly as he looked from the stern faces of the approaching officers to the damning financial documents still blazing brightly on the massive projector screens behind us. The reality of his catastrophic failure was finally penetrating his arrogant delusion. Terrence Brooks, the lead deputy, announced, his deep voice carrying easily across the hushed room. He unclipped a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest for multiple counts of felony wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and attempted elder exploitation. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." For a fleeting second, Terrence looked wildly toward the exit, as if contemplating a completely futile escape. Then the remaining fight drained out of him, leaving only the pathetic, hollow shell of a man who had built an entire life on stolen credit. He slowly turned around his shoulders, slumping in total defeat. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs ratcheting securely around his wrists echoed through the microphone I still held in my hand, amplifying his humiliation for his entire network of high society friends and corporate investors to hear. From the center of the crowd, Chloe let out another piercing wail. She scrambled up from the floor, her sequenced gown torn at the hem, and attempted to push her way toward her arrested husband. Two deputies immediately intercepted her path, raising their hands to halt her frantic progress. "Ma'am, you need to step back," one of the officers warned firmly. She ignored him, pointing a shaking, accusatory finger directly at me. "You cannot do this. She is crazy. She is a delusional old woman. Terrence, tell them she is sick." Attorney Vance stepped forward, pulling a crisp, white envelope from his inner breast pocket. He extended it toward Chloe with an expression of mild distaste. "Chloe Brooks," he stated, completely ignoring her hysterical outburst. "You are hereby served with an official 0-day eviction notice authorized directly by the sole proprietor of Onyx Holdings, LLC. You have exactly 5 minutes to gather any immediate personal belongings and vacate this property. Any items remaining in this residence after 5 minutes will be legally considered abandoned and disposed of accordingly." Chloe stared at the white envelope as if it were a venomous snake. She looked back at her husband, who was currently being aggressively escorted toward the main entrance by the arresting officers. She looked at her wealthy friends, desperately seeking a familiar face to intercede on her behalf, but the prominent socialites actively averted their eyes, physically turning their backs on her dramatic collapse. She was entirely alone. A female deputy stepped forward, handing Chloe a standard, heavy-duty black trash bag. 5 minutes, ma'am," the officer instructed coldly. "I strongly suggest you start moving." The live feed on Chloe's shattered phone, still resting on the marble floor, captured every agonizing second of her departure. The 50,000 virtual strangers who had tuned in to watch her boast about her fabricated empire were now intimately witnessing her dragging a black plastic garbage bag filled with disorganized clothing and loose cosmetics out the front door. I watched silently from the stage as the heavy oak doors closed firmly behind her, permanently sealing her out of my life. The silence in the ballroom stretched out thick and uncomfortable as the remaining guests awkwardly processed the sudden, brutal dissolution of their hosts. I raised the microphone one final time. "I apologize for the sudden disruption to your evening," I announced, my tone completely pleasant and entirely unbothered. "However, this private residence is now officially closed. I kindly ask that you locate your valets and safely exit the premises. Have a wonderful night." I turned and walked calmly down the stage stairs, completely ignoring the scattered nervous applause from a few highly intimidated investors. I found Malik waiting near the darkened audio-visual booth, his backpack securely slung over his shoulder. I offered him a small, genuine smile, and together we walked quietly toward the back staircase, leaving the bewildered elite to find their own way out. The arrests did not magically erase the damage, and I never pretended they did. In the days that followed, Vance and I spent long hours separating criminal evidence from the financial mess Terrence had created. The bank maintained its fraud hold on the forged commercial loan. Investigators collected the original application device records and the documents used in the attempted conservatorship. Chloe's recording of the staged narrative, the audio from the home office, and the public live stream all became part of a much larger record of intent. I treated each new filing as process rather than victory. Justice on paper is slower and less theatrical than justice in a ballroom. What mattered to me was that Terrence could no longer reach my accounts, could no longer represent himself as my decision-maker, and could no longer use my age as a weapon against me. Vance arranged for written notice to every financial institution where my name appeared, and I replaced the access credentials Terrence might once have known. I also moved the documents from the garage lockbox into secure storage. For the first time in months, there was no part of my life I had to hide inside my own home. Chloe's carefully constructed public image collapsed almost as quickly as it had been built. Clips from her own live stream circulated among the same people she had tried so hard to impress. Sponsors and social acquaintances disappeared. The grand invitations stopped. I took no pleasure in strangers mocking her appearance or turning the scandal into entertainment. That was never the point. I wanted the truth attached to the behavior, not cruelty attached to the person. When Vance asked whether I wanted to pursue every possible civil claim against her, I told him to protect my property and my finances first. Consequences did not need decoration. She had wanted an audience for the image of a helpless old maid. She had received an audience for the truth instead. The house itself changed after they were gone. The silence was unfamiliar at first. No ring lights clicked on in the kitchen. No one shouted from the staircase. No deliveries arrived carrying things nobody could afford. I had the locks changed and the office emptied of Terrence's business materials under Vance's supervision. Then I did something far less dramatic. I opened the curtains. For months, Chloe had kept several rooms dim because she said natural light ruined her videos. Morning sun poured across the dining table, touching the antique silver that had started the entire confrontation. I sat there with coffee and realized how absurd it was that a spoon, a camera, and a laughing emoji had become the first visible cracks in a family crisis years in the making. The disrespect had not created the fraud. It had simply made me stop excusing the people committing it. Malik remained quieter than usual during those first weeks. He never asked me to defend his father, nor did I ask him to condemn him. A 16-year-old boy should not have to choose between loving a parent and recognizing what that parent has done. I made sure he understood one thing clearly. Helping me did not make him responsible for Terrence's arrest. Terrence's choices did that. Malik had brought me information because he believed I was in danger, and when the situation became serious, we preserved evidence and brought adults and legal authorities into it. His talent mattered, but his judgment mattered more. I wanted him to leave this house, understanding that intelligence without ethics was simply another tool for exploitation. That lesson was one reason the trust documents I prepared for him mattered so deeply to me. 3 weeks passed, bringing a profound and deeply satisfying quiet to the sprawling estate. The garish, expensive furniture Chloe had purchased on credit had been methodically removed by collection agencies. The massive, echo-filled rooms now felt peaceful, stripped of their toxic, superficial energy. I sat at the large granite island in the kitchen, the morning sunlight warming my hands as I enjoyed a quiet cup of coffee. Malik sat across from me, quietly eating a bowl of cereal before heading to his morning classes. He had moved into the main house the day after the party, finally claiming a large, comfortable bedroom that overlooked the back gardens. I reached into my portfolio and pulled out a thick, sealed manila envelope. I slid it carefully across the smooth granite surface until it bumped gently against his cereal bowl. He looked up, his dark eyes curious as he wiped his mouth with a napkin. "What is this, Grandma?" he asked, his voice returning to its normal, steady pitch now that the constant threat of his father's anger had been permanently removed. I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Open it, Malik." He carefully tore the seal and extracted a dense stack of official legal documents. I watched his eyes scan the complex financial terminology, his brilliant mind quickly piecing together the structural implications of the paperwork. It was a formally established, completely irrevocable trust fund, registered entirely in his name. "I spent my career hunting people who tried to steal from the vulnerable," I explained softly, watching the shock slowly blossom across his young face. "I built a considerable fortune doing it. When your father decided to treat my life like a disposable asset, he forfeited his right to any of it. This family needs protectors, Malik. It does not need parasites." He stared at the final page of the document. The trust was specifically designed and fully funded to cover the absolute complete cost of an undergraduate and master's degree in cybersecurity at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, with a substantial remaining principal intended to fund his future independent endeavors. "I saw what you did with that encrypted routing sequence during the gala. I continued, a deep sense of pride swelling in my chest. You have an exceptional, truly rare gift. I am simply ensuring you have the exact resources required to hone that gift into a formidable weapon. Malik the quiet, observant boy who had spent his entire life shrinking into the background to avoid his father's aggressive disappointment, slowly put the papers down. His hands were trembling. He stood up from the bar stool, walked around the kitchen island, and wrapped his arms tightly around my shoulders. He buried his face in my neck, and for the first time since he was a very small child, I felt him quietly weeping. I held my grandson, resting my chin against his head, knowing absolutely that I had secured the right legacy for the right person. I sit now on the pristine back patio of my estate, the morning sun feeling warm and comforting against my face. I take a slow sip of my coffee, looking directly at the camera, reflecting on the profound, often harsh realities of maintaining a strong family. In our culture, a matriarch is expected to endure. We are expected to absorb the pain, the disrespect, and the endless demands of our children simply because we share the same blood. We are taught to protect our own even when they are actively destroying us. But true love, the kind of love that actually ensures the survival of a family tree, sometimes requires the ruthless amputation of a rotting branch. Some folks in my church congregation whisper that I was entirely too cold-blooded. They gossip that I should have handled Terrence's betrayal quietly behind closed doors, protecting his reputation, instead of letting him leave his own party in handcuffs on a viral live stream. They say a mother should never publicly destroy her own son. But I know the absolute truth. If I had been weak, if I had prioritized his fragile pride over my own survival, I would be rotting in a state ward right now, heavily medicated and forgotten with a permanent dementia tag strapped to my wrist. Tell me, am I a ruthless, unforgiving mother, or did I simply give my son the only brutal lesson that could possibly save him from his own greed? Let me know your honest thoughts in the comments below, and do not forget to subscribe.